Well, welcome everyone to our inaugural research symposium, which is linking together the Institute for Northern Studies Island Studies Hub and NAISR, the University of the Arctic Thematic Network on Northern and Arctic Island Studies research. The thematic network has been going for several years now, and we've built up a wonderful collection of members and created a really interesting network across the North Atlantic. And the Island Studies Hub is a new venture, bringing together island studies research that's being undertaken at the Institute for Northern Studies. Have a look at the website, you'll find out more. So today's seminar is inspired by the fact that the Northern and Arctic Islands are experiencing significant environmental, geopolitical, and societal transformations. And these challenges, are complex, and they do present problems, but they also present opportunities for the island's futures. So this symposium, we aim to foster interdisciplinary dialogue amongst our speakers and look at the long-term outlook for the islands. We were just discussing previously that we might come back in 25 years and see how accurate we have been in our prognostications. And then we realized 25 years is not very long. So we may all be still around to be able to discuss these things. So I'm very pleased to be involved in this. And I'm also very pleased to be the chair on the first session, which is going to look at Northern Islands in a changing geopolitical landscape, because as we're all very much aware, things ain't what they used to be. There have been some huge changes in the geopolitical position over the last year or so. So we have three wonderful speakers in this session who span a huge geographical area all the way from Western Canada to Estonia, with the Faroe Islands in the middle. Now, the way this is going to work is that each of the presenters is going to talk for about 10 minutes, and we would like questions and thoughts which you can post in the chat or the Q&A. I believe everyone should be able to do that. And then we'll have a discussion amongst ourselves and answer some of your questions in the remaining period of the session. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce the first of our speakers, Dr. Firouz Gaini from the Faroe Islands, who's a professor in anthropology, and his ethnographic fieldwork are focused on the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Japan. He's the associate editor of the Island Studies Journal, and Firouz and I have been developing things between us over the last couple of years, including the Faroes Shetland Research Symposia, which have brought the two archipelagos together to explore all sorts of interesting academic subjects. So, Firouz, would you like to start us off on this research seminar?
Thank you. I'll start by sharing my presentation. Let's see. Okay. So good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to give a short talk at this online symposium. Thank you, Andrew and Laurie, for preparing and coordinating this event. I've been looking forward to the symposium's talks and discussions this afternoon. And I have been asked to share my thoughts and visions for the future of Northern Islands in changing geopolitical landscape, as session 1 is called today. My reflections have the case of the Faroe Islands as point of departure. Being here in the Faroes, which is my home and also my main research site, feels sometimes as being in the eye of a hurricane or a geopolitical maelstrom. Things are moving fast around the Faroes these days, and the turbulence is influencing our relationship with the neighboring countries, larger region, and world. It forces us to rethink old alliances, business partnerships, security concerns, constitutional structures, and geopolitical priorities. And in this landscape, there is no crystal ball revealing future events. Therefore, preparedness for future threats, crises, and disasters, which have roots in other parts of the world, is an increasingly important subject in the Faroese political debate. There is growing awareness of the multi-layered global influence on local issues in the Faroes. The COVID-19 pandemic, as an example, changed the everyday life for people in even the most remote villages of the Faroe Islands. The pandemic made people realize how intertwined local and global movements and transitions are in the globalizing world, including the Faroes in the Northeast Atlantic. And the old myth about the hidden and secluded small islands was debunked for good. This discussion also leads us to the question, how resilient or vulnerable are the Northern and Arctic islands? So let us take a closer look at the Faroes in a changing geopolitical landscape. The Faroe Islands is a self-governing national country in the Danish realm, yet outside of the European Union. The Home Rule Act from 1948 remains in force, and the Løgting, the Faroese parliament, has seized control over almost all shared and exclusive competences mentioned in the Act. With two expansions, the Takeover Act and the Foreign Policy Act, both from 2005, the Løgting's possibility to assume further competences have been considerably expanded. In other words, the country has today full authority to assume legislative and executive competences in the Faroes, apart from the constitution, citizenship, Supreme Court, foreign and defense policy, and monetary matters. It has own flag, anthem, coat of arms, stamps, banknotes, language, and a parliament. The Faroes do not have armed forces and no mandatory military services through Denmark, yet it is part of NATO through Denmark. It's an independent member of different regional and international associations, for instance, in sports, arts, science, fisheries, and marine resource management, and different NGOs, but it is defined as a part of Denmark in other organizations. The Faroes, in other words, is using paradiplomatic opportunities at hand, for instance, by entering a growing number of regional and international organizations to strengthen and diversify its activities in the quest of protection and promotion of Faroese interests. Today, with growing tensions in the Arctic region, the question about security, defense, and preparedness or emergency preparedness in the Nordic Atlantic is in focus in the Faroese political discourse on international relations. How can we protect ourselves in the case of a military crisis? This political climate has resulted in new agreements about defense collaboration in the Danish realm, Nordic region, and in Europe. The delineation of political jurisdiction between Denmark and the Faroes is in some cases ambiguous. Denmark intervenes in matters deemed too serious for the Faroes to manage independently. The mechanism is particularly evident in areas framed as security politics, which are administered by Denmark, as opposed to trade politics managed by the Faroes. And through a process of securitization, extraordinary measures are justified by perceived security threats, allowing Denmark to exert control over the situation. So established power dynamics in the northern and Arctic regions are being destabilized and are paving the way for new centers of influence and granting agency to the countries within the region. China, Russia, and the US have all been considering and engaging in close dialogue with the Faroes as a society to establish strategic, commercial, technological, diplomatic, and maritime collaboration. US President Donald Trump has recently, this year, reiterated his direct interest in appropriating Greenland because of American security needs as a reaction to Russian military ambitions in the Arctic. This provocative rhetoric has yielded new political debate about neocolonialism, independence, and strategic alliances in Greenland. And the Faroese are closely monitoring the geopolitical turbulence in Greenland, which is a part of the Danish realm, just like the Faroes. So what is taking place in what I earlier called the geopolitical maelstrom shaking the Faroes today? Here are a few examples of events resonating a new geopolitical landscape in the northern and Arctic regions. Concerning telecommunication, a few years ago, the Faroes planned to construct 5G telecommunication technology infrastructure in collaboration with the Chinese giant Huawei. But in November 2019, a leaked audio recording revealed Chinese pressure on the Faroese Prime Minister to adopt Chinese technology giant Huawei's network in exchange for trade access to the Chinese market, highlighting the intricacies of international relations. The contract with Huawei was thereafter cancelled. And concerning technology more broadly, there is a growing concern over risk management and preparedness concerning telecommunication, air traffic navigation systems, international subsea cable infrastructure, transportation technologies, and so on. And at the University of the Faroe Islands, the digital infrastructure security has also been upgraded recently. Concerning Russia, since 2015, but especially after the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, ongoing Faroese relations with Russia, first and foremost through the bilateral fishing agreement, have been strongly criticized by the European Union. In the Faroese government, the politicians are divided in this question: to continue or discontinue the fishing agreement with Russia. The dispute between the Faroes and the European countries has recently also been linked to discussions about security with reference to the risk of Russian sabotage and espionage operations in the island society. Concerning the United States, there is a growing US geopolitical interest in the Faroes. In recent years, we have had regular visits from American nuclear-powered submarines and aircraft carriers in the Faroes, and high-ranked US representatives, for example, congressmen, NATO officers, and ambassadors, have also been in the country for meetings with Faroese authorities. And there are plans of establishing port facilities for military vessels from NATO countries. I have now tried to illustrate some of the impact of the changing geopolitical landscape on the Faroes. And I will conclude with a few ideas about the future. The Northern and Arctic Islands will need to cope with geopolitical changes that make them interesting for superpowers in struggle for influence and power in the Arctic. The changing geopolitical landscape is also changing the relation between economic, political, and strategic international relations. In the Faroese case, we have seen that the fishing industry, which is the main industry of the country, has become enmeshed in international security politics because of the fishing agreement with Russia. These developments will also result in new discussions about the relationship between the non-sovereign island territories and the metropoles. As Adam Grütehøj explains in an article, by allowing Denmark to maintain defense and security control over Greenland and the Faroes, the island societies in the Danish realm elevate Denmark and allow it to punch above its weight in the international arena, an important voice and significant power in Arctic security next to US and Russia. The island societies will be looking for ways to balance self-government and more or less binding international partnerships. The geopolitical landscape will therefore lead to search for new agreements based on a new global order between the islands and the metropoles, which resonates the islanders' sense of place, identity, and autonomy in the northern and Arctic regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Firouz. Yes, some really important things to consider there. I've already got a couple of questions written down that I'll ask you in it shortly. But thank you very much for that overview of the situation in the Faroe Islands and the conflicting international pressures that seem to have been part of the Faroese experience over the last couple of years. So thanks very much indeed. Right, so we're moving on now from the Faroe Islands. We're going to go to Estonia. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Merit Kindsigo. Sorry about that, Merit. I should have practiced your second name there in the green room. She's the director of Taltech Kuressaare. I got that right, I think. School of Engineering, and she's the vice chair and co-founder of the Estonian Maritime Cluster. She's a lecturer and the appointed representative of Estonia in the Captech Maritime in European Defence Agency as a non-governmental expert. Merit has been in service as a short-term intern in the Estonian Embassy in Brussels, and as an islander of at least 7 generations, she likes to call herself a patriotic expert of the Baltic Sea. And as the head of the college on the island, she supports and develops what's needed for the development of the region and the community, and also the revitalization of the maritime industry. So welcome, Merit.
Thank you. Yes, you should practice my name,
I should.
but it's okay. I hope you see my slides.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So I will try to give a brief overview of the key issues what we are facing here today in Estonia. Looking to 2050 and beyond, Estonia and its Northern Ireland geopolitical position will be shaped by several long-term trends, with defense, technology, and climate change being the primary drivers. As we all know, Estonia has been a member of NATO and EU since 2004. The geopolitical changes have solidified its commitment to these alliances and its role as a key member of NATO's eastern flank. The full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2022 has fundamentally shifted Estonia's security calculus. As a country with a direct border with Russia, Estonia views the conflict as a direct threat to its own security and has moved to a state of heightened military readiness. Through history, border countries have been platforms for gathering information and testing environment. But what is important, however, is that we, Estonia, define ourselves as a situation awareness platform. Through us, NATO is strengthening its eastern flank. Estonia's Northern Islands have always held significant strategic importance. A position at the entrance of the Gulf of Finland makes them crucial choke point. Both of the United States and German attachés have said that when looking at the map of Estonia, it seems that the greatest threat of attack is to the coastal waters of Saaremaa and Hiiumaa, which are the biggest island of Estonia. No one will come ashore. We will come between the two islands, send out drones, and the range of action will cover all the islands and most of mainland Estonia. Russia's invasion of Ukraine has forced the Scandinavian countries, which have maintained neutrality for 200 years, to re-evaluate their foreign policy. Finland, Sweden, and Norway have not placed much emphasis on the military until now, because now they have become the front line in confrontation with their eastern neighbor. What then is our role? In my opinion, islands in the Baltic Sea have become focal points of security policy. A shift is taking place. Although islands are remote, it is a good place to keep a close eye what is happening at sea. Given the high traffic density in the Baltic Sea, it is nearly impossible to monitor everything that happens in the sea. According to the HELCOM, around 2,000 ships are moving in the Baltic Sea at any given time. From a security perspective, it may at some point be justified to monitor all civilian vessel traffic as well. This in turn could lead to a total military and security control over commercial shipping lanes. From this point, the Baltic Sea would be fully transitioned into a so-called controlled NATO lake. Maritime traffic around Saaremaa and Hiiumaa could be subject to strict real-time monitoring and management by combined maritime forces. Commercial vessels may have to follow designated pre-approved corridors and be subject to automated security checks. Any deviation from these routes will be flagged immediately as a potential threat. You may ask why. According to the recent data, Russian shadow fleet has about 600 vessels. For example, the Finnish border guard patrols the sea every day, and every day they spot nearly a dozen Russian vessels of shadow fleet in the distance. 1 year after joining NATO, Gotland, the biggest island of Sweden, hosted the biggest military exercise Sweden has seen in 25 years, with 26,000 soldiers from 14 different countries. Sweden plans to increase the number of soldiers on Gotland tenfold by 2027. All this for one simple reason. Gotland remains within the firing range of Russian missiles from the Kaliningrad military base. Anyway, technological advancements will lead to a new era of maritime transport. By 2050, a significant portion of commercial vessels operating in the Baltic Sea may be either autonomous or remotely piloted. Regardless of the development of autonomous system, Estonia's defense strategy is shifting from a focus on deterrence to a greater emphasis on direct defense. The experience of a war in Ukraine has shown that there is a rapid increase in the use of all types of reduced size equipment, underwater technology in every field, from situational awareness to civil transport and economic activities. This means that technologies are also developing in a rapid pace, including in Estonia, as we have the opportunity to use the Baltic Sea as a real-life laboratory and testing ground. Drones and autonomous underwater vehicles can test constant surveillance. AI-powered command and control systems can process data from civilian and military sources to provide real-time situational awareness, allowing for a faster response to threats than human-only systems could manage. Do we need it? Yes. The seabed is full of communication cables between European countries. At least 7 underwater cables have been cut in the last 2 years, and every time, Russian commercial vessels are suspected of being involved. Ships drag anchors and break underwater cables and pipelines. Scandinavian countries have clearly understood that and act accordingly. The next major issue affecting the islands is shift in maritime routes in changing climate. Climate change and the melting of polar ice will open Northern Sea route as a viable year-round alternative. This will have a significant and potentially negative impact on traditional Baltic Sea traffic. If global traffic shifts away to the Northern Sea route, the Baltic Sea's role will become more focused on regional short sea shipping and specialized cargo. The islands with their smaller ports could become more important as logistical hubs for local distribution. On the other hand, environmental regulations and market forces push for the rapid decarbonization of the shipping industry. The Baltic Sea can be a proving ground for this transition, with Estonia at the forefront of developing green maritime infrastructure. A warmer climate could also extend the Baltic Sea shipping season, increasing the island's economic importance as maritime hubs. The islands could become showcases for climate resilient engineering and green energy hubs. By 2050 and beyond, Estonia's energy landscape could be defined by its complete departure from oil shale, a massive expansion of renewable energy, and a strategic embrace of new technologies. The Northern Islands will be in the middle of this transformation, becoming key players in the regional and secure energy grid in the Baltic Sea. The country is accelerating its shift to renewable energy. Most likely, the most significant change will be the full realization of offshore wind power in the Baltic Sea. The changes in decentralization and emergence of smart grids should not be underestimated either. A complex smart grid will create a more resilient and secure network. Smart meters and AI-powered systems will automatically balance supply and demand, drawing on a mix of local solar, wind, and battery storage to ensure continuous power, reducing reliance on mainland connection. Estonia faces as well a long-term demographic challenge with a small and aging population. Being a global leader in e-governance, cybersecurity, and e-residency may not give only positive effects. The development of e-residency program may result in the creation of an official digital citizenship, which would enable Estonia's digital citizens in a global network to contribute to the country's economic development through specialized remote work and expertise. Indeed, this would increase the country's resilience and influence without being tied to physical location, but at the same time, the islands may become depopulated as physical presence and residence are no longer necessary in an increasingly digital world. Major transport corridors moving elsewhere, leaving peripheral areas empty, drawing young people away. As people interact with each other less and less, communities and individuals become strangers to each other, and with a loss of a sense of unity, the power of cooperation weakens. Beyond military defense, the islands are integrated to Estonia's comprehensive security strategy, which includes civil preparedness and has meant in practice a rapid increase in the number of volunteers joining the Estonian Defence League. Estonia's comprehensive security concept means that the local governments on islands are actively involved in crisis planning, from civil defense exercises to ensuring resilience of essential services like electricity, water, and transport links to the mainland. It is common knowledge that communities on islands must be prepared for any crisis. And in summary, it could be said that Northern Islands and islands in the Baltic Sea are strategically very important and their significance is only growing. Whether we like it or not, the islands will soon be remarkably fortified, not just with traditional military assets, but with a new generation of smart defense systems. The islands may become keynotes for future digital Iron Curtain with advanced Long-range coastal defense missile systems, drone swarms, and electronic warfare capabilities to control the maritime domain. The importance of the island's role also includes maintaining critical maritime energy infrastructure and ensuring security. The islands could be home to large-scale offshore wind farms, making them central to Europe's green energy grid and a new strategic asset to protect. All issues, directly or indirectly, related to security are important. If there is a movement somewhere, security must be guaranteed. Any simple situation can easily escalate. The sea today is still largely unknown. The stakes are high. Cables, routes, intelligence activities, even real estate transactions on the coast and islands are really important. Food security, sustainability in securing raw materials, energy security, civil security, situational awareness. Supporting and developing these topics during times of political unrest gives us a better understanding of ourselves and teaches us to recognize our limits and capabilities, because knowing our capabilities is vital in a crisis. So there is nothing we can do about it, but Scandinavia and the Baltic states are on the so-called military wave, which is due to our location and events in the world. This is our new reality, which we are already getting used to. The main thing we can do is prepare ourselves, be ready, and remain hopeful. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Merit. Yes, remain hopeful. That's something we should definitely do. I visited Hiiumaa several years ago, and I was shown the Soviet guardhouses that had kept people off the beach, and I was also shown the house of the last Swede to live on the island, the only one who hadn't left during the Second World War. So it was brought home to me just how important the Estonian islands are in the geopolitical world. But that was before the more recent events in Ukraine, where they've become even more important on the world stage. But thanks very much for explaining all that. And we have one question so far in the Q&A, so please keep adding them there, and we'll have an opportunity to address those shortly. But before that, I'd like to introduce our third speaker in this session. So Dr. Gary Wilson, I can pronounce Gary's name, there we go. He's professor and chair in the Department of Political Science at the University of Northern British Columbia. That's in Canada, in case people were wondering. So that shows the extent of this particular session. And his research focuses on governance, politics, and Indigenous state relations in the Canadian and Circumpolar North, and also minority language revitalization in the Isle of Man and other small island jurisdictions. His most recent project examines territorial autonomy and the impacts of globalization in subnational island jurisdictions in the North Atlantic and Arctic. So with that, welcome, Gary.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for inviting me to take part in this session. As Andrew mentioned, I don't live on an island. I live in Prince George, which is an inland community on Canada's west coast in British Columbia. And my research to date really has focused a lot more on Indigenous self-governance and Indigenous state relations in the Canadian Arctic, but also comparative work looking at the Indigenous these issues in comparative perspective in other jurisdictions. But I've recently moved away from that research and decided to focus more on small island governance in the last decade or so of my career. And I don't necessarily view this as a sharp break. Indeed, as I'll allude to in this presentation, I see a number of important parallels between the political and jurisdictional challenges that are facing Indigenous peoples and regions in the Arctic and those facing northern islands. Rather than doing a conventional PowerPoint, I decided just to prepare some general remarks in part because I'm at the beginning of a new research project, and I hope these remarks will serve as a basis for more discussion. And there'll be a bit of overlap, I think, between what the previous presenters have said, but hopefully that will generate some discussion later on. So, I mean, the fate of northern islands and regions more generally is an issue that is certainly in the news today. I mean, we just have to consider the recent threats posed to Greenland's sovereignty by the United States and the threat to the stability of the Svalbard archipelago that posed by Russia as two very current and recent examples of how geopolitics is affecting islands in the north. However, if we take a longer historical view, northern islands have always had to navigate choppy geopolitical waters, and sometimes these geopolitical threats present both opportunities as well as challenges. A case in point is Iceland, which until 1944 was part of the Kingdom of Denmark. Following a friendly occupation by Allied forces during the Second World War, it would eventually gain its independence. And as I understand it, and Firouz can confirm this, the Faroe Islands were facing a similar situation in the end of the Second World War. And even though they decided in a referendum to become independent, it never came to fruition, and they remained integrated into the Kingdom of Denmark. Given their size and their strategic location, northern islands have always been subject to the geopolitical and imperial ambitions of larger states. For many islands in the Arctic and subarctic regions, you could argue that this threat has dissipated in the second half of the 20th century as the kind of democratic core states responded, albeit slowly in many cases, to demands for greater autonomy and greater self-government. But the threat hasn't disappeared altogether, as Merritt pointed out in her remarks just prior to me. Is it possible for northern islands to insulate themselves from geopolitical threats? One might argue that embedding or integrating yourself in an existing state is one way to do this. The downside, of course, is that the more integrated you are, the less autonomy you have. So it's a delicate balancing act that requires innovation and patience. And this is the predicament in which most northern islands currently find themselves. Most island jurisdictions and their inhabitants want to be in control of policy areas that affect them directly because their circumstances and needs are unique and different from those of mainland jurisdictions. In fact, it is true that of many northern jurisdictions and not just islands. This is why I see some important parallels between the circumstances facing northern islands and, for example, indigenous regions in Canada and across the circumpolar north. So in addition to navigating choppy geopolitical waters, they are also negotiating a jurisdictional tightrope between integration and independence. Although independence is certainly top of mind for some islanders and indigenous peoples for that matter, many prefer to occupy a jurisdictional middle ground between the two. If we consider full integration into a larger state and full independence as a sovereign state in the international order as two poles, the middle ground between the two seems like a medium. In theory, you have the protection and support of a larger state, while at the same time you have the autonomy to control and administer policy areas that matter to you the most. And here I think of the Faroe Islands and the Isle of Man, which is an island jurisdiction that I'm quite familiar with and have done quite a bit of research on, as examples of northern islands that have found a middle ground between integration and independence, with which they are generally comfortable. Of course, as always, the devil is in the details. Geographic location, economic dependencies, changing domestic and geopolitical conditions and circumstances, and other factors always threaten to upend the delicate balance between integration and independence that have been achieved by these northern islands. These circumstances also limit an island's ability to evolve and grow its autonomy. For many islands, there seems to be a ceiling on just how close they can get to complete independence or even greater autonomy. For example, some island jurisdictions are calling for greater control over resource development, both onshore and offshore. And international relations, as Firouz mentioned, paradiplomacy is something that the Faroe Islands is increasingly wanting to engage in. And these are areas that have been traditionally controlled by states within our geopolitical order. And states jealously guard their jurisdiction over these areas. In some cases, such as resource development, they are extremely reluctant to give up control over lucrative natural resource revenues that they depend on for their own economic development. One of the problems, however, is that northern islands and northern regions more generally often have limited options when it comes to economic development and diversification, which is kind of the basis for political autonomy, I would argue. For many, control over renewable and, more importantly, non-renewable resources represent one of the ways that they can wean themselves off dependency on their core states. Some northern islands have taken advantage of their political status to seek creative solutions to the dependency dilemma. For example, in the absence of natural resources and following the decline of traditional industries such as fishing, farming, and tourism in the 1960s and 1970s, the Isle of Man developed its financial services sector. Not without controversy, you understand. Despite the success that the island has achieved in financial services, it is still vulnerable to larger global organizations which make and enforce the rules in these areas. And while it has been able to count on the support of the United Kingdom in these international negotiations, even though it's technically not part of the United Kingdom, it still has to tread very carefully. And as my colleagues and you, the audience members, are well aware, not all island jurisdictions are in a position to cultivate a lucrative financial services sector. This was the path the Isle of Man took, but it's not open to other jurisdictions given their level of autonomy and their jurisdictional authority. Many Northern Island jurisdictions are still relying on traditional industries, which are vulnerable to the boom and bust cycles of the global economy. And this is certainly an important parallel that I see between Northern Islands and other northern regions, such as the region that I live in, northern British Columbia, which is heavily dependent on resource development of both renewable and non-renewable types. So those are just some thoughts on the question of Northern Islands in the changing geopolitical context. I want to thank again the organizers for including me in this panel, and I look forward to the questions and the discussion period following. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary, and thank you for getting up so early in the morning to attend as well. It's very much appreciated. You talk about autonomy. Well, there's ongoing autonomy discussions in Shetland, perennial. I know you're aware of those. So I'm going to just stick a link in the chat for those who might not be aware of that, just so that they can follow up on this hot topic that continues to surface in Shetland. But I don't want to go off on a tangent. I'd like to address what the three speakers have presented. Changing times. I mean, it's different now in our islands from what it was 5 years ago. Merritt, you talked about the cutting of cables. Well, we suffered that in Shetland in 2023. No one has explained what it was, but there was mysterious boats seen in places where they shouldn't be. So we had an emergency, police emergency that lasted for many days and disrupted life. So the security in Shetland is being upgraded and looked at. So without naming the potential perpetrator, it seems that both the Faroe Islands and the Estonian Islands are facing the same challenges. And we do have a question in the Q&A. I'll just remind people you can post your questions there. I'm not sure if the chat works for everyone. It should, but the Q&A definitely does. And I've got Neil Janssen's question, which I'll address to Firouz and maybe expand a little bit. So Neil says, since the 1970s and 80s, both Greenlandic and Faroese governments have historically been opposed to closer cooperation with and integration into the EU. Can you explain if the recent tensions with Russia about the Faroes and the US about Greenland have changed that and might result in a rapprochement with the EU? And I just want to add to that while we're thinking about potential rapprochements or connections. Is the new situation just as it has, as Merit pointed out, in Sweden and Finland, caused Sweden and Finland to join NATO? Has the situation in the Faroes, I don't know, made NATO more popular? And is there a sort of, you mentioned NATO, but you didn't mention the UK, which is probably your closest reasonably big-sized military power. Is there any sort of rapprochement there as well? So just a sort of general question on where is the Faroe Islands focusing its interest at the moment?
Thank you for the question. I saw it on the chat, but then it disappeared. So it's good that you repeated it, Andrew. Yeah, concerning the relation to the European Union, when Denmark entered the European community in 1973, Greenland became a member at the same time, and they regretted it and left the European community later. And the Faroe Islands, the government asked for a few months to reflect on and evaluate the opportunities and challenges in relation to a membership. And they, after 3 months, they sent a message to Copenhagen that we prefer to stay outside. And for Greenland and the Faroe Islands, the main reason was the same. It was that the problem of losing control over your fisheries and fishing activities in your territorial waters, which was the main industries, and that has, until recently, there has not been any serious discussion, political discussion in the Faroe Islands, suggesting that we should apply to become members of EU. One thing is the fishing industry. The other thing is, of course, also the constitutional situation and our position in the Danish realm, which would probably also give us very limited influence in EU. But it's true that things are changing, and while the Faroe Islanders are not discussing membership or integration into the European Union, we are working hard to get closer collaboration, strategic collaboration. Firstly, fishing agreement, which has been very difficult. We have tried to get a good fishing agreement with European Union, but it's been very difficult, which has made people disappointed by the European Union. And secondly, concerning security and defense questions. So there is a much stronger voice today in our public and among our politicians that we are in a world and in a geopolitical landscape where we need protection and support from the alliance that we consider to be closest to us culturally, politically, historically. So in that sense, there is there is a much stronger engagement in discussions about closer collaboration with the EU. And a few years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, Ursula von der Leyen came to the Faroe Islands for a meeting with our prime minister, and that meeting in itself is demonstrating how important this is for us, but also for the EU. President Macron, the French president, was recently in Greenland also, which is very unusual that a European state leader visits and formally goes to a visit in Greenland, which also is clearly signaling the need for the stronger ties, and which is related to the security situation and the Russian interests in the Arctic. So that was the first part. Now I forgot which was the other part of the question, Andrew, that you added.
Well, it was just this idea of new rapprochements or new arrangements, and I just wondered if there was anything under the NATO umbrella, but specifically that was being done with the UK for defence, because exactly. we share the same bit of sea.
Yes. Yeah, and you asked about NATO also. I can tell you that I remember around it's many years ago, maybe almost 40 years ago, there was an American military vessel coming to the harbor in Tórshavn, and there were demonstrations at the harbor, and there were people trying to force the vessel out again, and that doesn't exist anymore. And you don't see any protests, and there have been, as I mentioned, there have been several vessels and also submarines, and most people don't consider it to be a threat. There are critical voices, but mostly people see it as a part of a new reality. And the relation to UK in that sense is very much through NATO also. So there have been also cross-national NATO, what do you call it, exercises in Faroese territorial waters with military vessels and also aircrafts in the area.
Thank you, Firouz. Thank you very much. And Gary, you've got your hand up.
Yeah.
I do, but my computer is running out of juice. So, hi everyone. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question. As Firouz was speaking there, talking about the Faroe Islands relationship with the European Union, I thought about the Isle of Man, which also had a similar relationship, and when the UK joined in 1973, they decided not to join the EU, but they developed a protocol arrangement that allowed them certain benefits of EU membership. And of course, when Brexit happened in 2016, 2020, they really didn't have a choice. They had to leave, and along with the UK, and so it just demonstrates the vulnerability of violence to these broader geopolitical or national whims, and I think it's quite possible that some of the bigger geopolitical storm clouds, storms that are raging right now, will kind of force northern islands to rethink their relationship with maybe friendlier organizations or friendlier countries around the world, as a matter of course.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary. Well, I've got we've still got time for at least one more question. So I've got a question for Merit. You made a very good explanation of the vital role that Estonia and also particularly the Estonian islands play in the Baltic. And then you mentioned the other Baltic islands as well. Now, clearly, there'll be a lot of international connections via NATO with Sweden and Finland. But I wondered, at more sort of a more local level, are there developing connections between the Estonian islands and the Finnish islands and the Swedish ones on a kind of, not on the state level, but a more sort of a local level?
What do you mean by local level? Do you mean local communities, local
local
municipality?
communities, local councils, local
Yes,
municipalities.
of course. We have friends, and I know our municipality regularly visits both islands, Gotland and, for example, Bornholm as well. So most definitely, because we feel similarities, we feel that we are linked to each other, we share the same or similar the destiny and future in many points, and of course we are trying to strengthen our bond.
Thank you. And following up, there's a question from Jens here for you, Merit. Is there any local resistance to military or energy projects in your islands? In Denmark, Parliament recently passed a law that in the name of war, they can dismiss more than 20 other laws and principles that, among many things, protect local communities from getting taken over by large infrastructure projects. So they've amended the law to make things simpler for the government to make developments that will be for security, I presume, energy and military security. So is there resistance in Hiiumaa or Saaremaa for some of the government developments?
This is a really good question. Actually, I have no idea. But until it hasn't reached or got into a local or national media, it means we don't have big issues related to that, because usually NATO is our big friend, and we support strongly everything what alliance forces and members do, and we don't have other options. This is a crucial and vital thing for us to support these developments. Yes,
indeed. Okay, well, one final question, and this is just: do you think we will be at war with Russia by 2030? This seems to be the latest sort of suggestion.
No.
No. Earlier.
I refuse.
Well, I hope that's the case. Well, thank you very much indeed. Positive thinking from Mari, very good. There are no other questions at the moment, but there's a lot to think about. And also that the challenges are similar across the north, that all our islands are, maybe some islands are more aware of the challenges than others, but opportunities like this to hear what's happening in Estonia and also in Canada and Faroes does open the eyes and helps us to plan more for the future. So thank you very much for that session, and you can all relax now and think of questions for the next session, because we're going to move now to session 2, which some of the themes have actually been started by Merit, who was talking about large economic developments. So that will actually start to feature in what we're talking about next. We're going to explore the scope and scale of Northern and Arctic development. So it's exploring pathways for sustainable development and looking at renewable energy, resource management, tourism, and digital infrastructure. And we are very lucky in this session to have Pia Prost from Finland, Laurie Brinklow from Canada, and Nick Mercer from Canada as well. So I'd like to introduce, first of all, Pia Prost, who very kindly showed me around the Finnish archipelago earlier in the year. So thank you very much for that, Pia. Now, Pia has worked for many years in sustainable development in European island and archipelago communities, with a particular focus on the Archipelago Sea Biosphere Reserve in Finland. She's a board member of the National Association of Finnish Islands and vice chair for the European Small Islands Federation. And through her work at the Archipelago Institute at Åbo Akademi University, she and colleagues developed the concept of habitability, which is an assessment tool for measuring the viability and sustainability of island communities. And she's also has been the editor of Skärgård, a Nordic magazine dedicated to nature, culture, and society in the archipelago. And she's now a doctoral student at Södertörn University in Sweden. And I've got a copy of Skärgård there just to show what a wonderful publication it is. So, welcome, Pia.
Thank you, and greetings from the Archipelago Sea. Can you see my screen?
Yes, indeed. Looking good.
Yeah, perfect. Yes, so I come from the southwest of Finland. And as Andrew said, I have worked with rural and archipelago development for quite many years. For example, at the Archipelago Institute at Åbo Akademi University. And 3 weeks ago, I moved to Södertörn University outside Stockholm, where I'm now a PhD student, something I couldn't have imagined 25 years ago, since we're talking about the future 2050. For 5 years, me and my colleagues have been working with a concept we called habitability, a tool to measure the viability of small island communities. The first version was made by islanders of Körkar in the Åland Islands. It's a concept based on citizen science, since only the islanders themselves hold the real knowledge of the dynamics of their society. Habitability is closely related to UN's sustainability goals, but sets the goals on a very local level. Being habitable means there are jobs, housing, a school, ferries, well-being, the requisite for a sustainable society that can take care of its inhabitants, its nature, and the surrounding sea. The Archipelago Institute has developed the concept further. So we look at the island society through 45 indicators divided into 7 areas. And all these areas can be directly combined with one or several of the UN sustainability goals. And I won't go into the details of the actual work. It takes about half a year to do all the indicators, but you can find the whole handbook for the concept on the link shown here on the screen. However, the first area, place identity, we look at the human pressure on the island, as well as accessibility and the perceived distance. And then we go through ecosystems, energy, freshwater, the local economy, public service, and at last, prosperous people, where we look into well-being, inclusion, trust, safety, culture, and so on. 15 islands or archipelago areas have done the analysis so far, and there are 11 more to come. They are being done at the moment. And these are all in Finland, but hopefully in the near future, habitability work will also start in at least Denmark and in Croatia. And just last week, we got the first reports from my own archipelago area in the municipality of Pargas. And I thought I'd show you some of their results, focusing on the human pressure. And the human pressure we get by counting what we call person days. For example, if an island have 100 inhabitants, you calculate 100 times 365, that is all days of the year, and that will give you 36,500 person days. If we look at the map, the blue area is the archipelago sea biosphere reserve. So I'm living by the orange dot, so right outside the biosphere reserve. The island of Nagu, the orange circle, has 1,350 inhabitants. But if you take into account also the other populations, so to say, the part-time inhabitants, as well as all tourists, you get the result of 3,952. This is the human pressure on Nagu. It's as big as there would be almost 4,000 people on the island every day of the year. However, as you know, most people spend their summers on the islands, mostly in the summers. So a day in July in Nagu, we have more than 12,000 tourists or persons. So the tourist to local ratio in Nagu is 159 to 1. So one islander carries the weight of 159 tourists. And I would just want to remind you that the world record for nations is held by Andorra, where the ratio is, 38 to 1. So it's a huge difference. So looking at the three other islands that have made the analysis, Håkär, Korpo, and Inia, they all show exactly the same pattern. You have Inia in the north, the smallest one in terms of population, and they have a tourist to local ratio of 234 to 1. And however, this is not an unusual figure for an island. It's the same all over Europe. So what effects does the human pressure then have on the sustainability of the islands? I have here listed a few, but I know there are many more. Of course, there is a very high pressure on the natural landscape. And here in our area, we have ongoing discussions if it's wiser to try to steer the tourist streams to specific locations, for example, a Moomin island where everybody would go, or is it better that they spread out in the whole area and then the pressure won't be that big on a specific spot? Landscape planning, where should you be allowed to build, for example, summer cottages? I know the municipality, when they have planned the area, they would like to put, for example, villages not along the coast, but in the middle of the islands. But of course, people both the ones that move there to live, but also summer cottages, they want to stay along the shores. As you might know, the ecological footprint of an islander is usually quite high, mostly because of the ferry traffic. Now we have the same vessels trafficking all year round, although they might be quite empty in the winter, however, emitting the same amount of emissions. So should there be different vessels trafficking, both these bigger ones that also can take on, for example, cars? Should we also have the quicker ones that take on only persons? So it's an ongoing discussion, but of course it has to do with the money, as always. If you look at the economical sustainability, a shop or restaurant owner on the island has to take account the extreme fluctuations in the population, and will he or she even be able to find workers for the summer, since they won't be needed in the winter? there has been an exchange for many years that workers go to Lapland in the winter and then come to the archipelago in the summer. But that seems to have stopped. I think it's because the Lapland tourist season is now longer. You tend to go also by bike in Lapland, so that's not longer an option. And of course, there's a total different need for services and infrastructure. For example, on many islands, there is a problem with fresh water. There is simply not enough in the summer. And with more dry summers to come, the problem is growing bigger. And then looking at social sustainability, thinking, for example, about safety and preparedness, how can we handle the amount of 12,000 persons in the summer instead of 1,300 as on the island of Nagu, which is the official record of the amount of inhabitants in case of a crisis. So to put it short, if the islands can't find a sustainable way to handle the fact that they are two different societies, one in the winter and one in the summer months, so then we have a sustainability problem. So from my side, this is more of a snapshot, not a prediction, but I hope this maybe gave you some thoughts and ideas for the coming discussion. So you can find me on Södertörn University where I will be actually looking at sustainability in island societies. But habitability and the concept you can find at Åbo Academy University in Finland.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Pia, I put the link in the chat for people to have a look at the habitability handbook. And I would recommend anyone who has a deep interest in islands, who's interested in finding out how to, well, what stage of sustainability their particular island is in, to have a good look at this and see if it might be applicable to their own experience. I mean, I hope that some Scottish islands will take this on board and start using it to explore it, because it is very detailed and the metrics are all extremely useful. And hopefully it will help guide island communities to have vibrant, successful futures. So thank you very much indeed, Pia, and good luck with a PhD. So. And next we have Dr. Laurie Brinklow, a colleague and friend of mine, although we work in universities that are quite far apart. Laurie is an assistant professor of island studies at the University of Prince Edward Island in Canada, and she serves as coordinator of the Masters of Arts in Island Studies, and we get our students connected across the pond and talking to each other. And she's also the chair of the Institute of Island Studies, which is a wonderful organization in her university. Her research focuses on sustainable island communities, community well-being, and the power of place and story and their impact on identity. She's published several academic journals, well, in many academic journals and books, and is the author of 2 books of poetry. She's Iceland's honorary consul for PEI and president of the International Small Island Studies Association, ICISA. She was recently awarded the Order of Prince Edward Island, the island's highest civilian order. And we've co-edited a book together, which is hopefully is the first of many. So thank you very much, Laurie.
Thank you, Andrew. That's fantastic. I'm loving this so far, this wonderful symposium that we've put together. And Pia, I just wanted to say that the habitability concept has made it over to Prince Edward Island. One of our graduates in the Master of Arts in Island Studies program has decided to do it as part of one of his projects. And we were looking at Prince Edward Island at the upper end, as you were talking about, what happens when you have all of these tourists that come at a certain time and the pressure that's on a place. And so how habitable is Prince Edward Island at the upper end? And it's been really fascinating. Can I just check that my screen is working, sharing okay? Is that looking okay, Andrew? Oh, yes. Beautiful. So I'm going to talk today. That's a lovely shot by a local guy of one of our shorelines. You can see the distinctive red soil of Prince Edward Island and the sandstone. We call ourselves a glorified sandbar out in the middle of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and we are located on the east coast of Canada. Before I show you the map, I just wanted to say what I'm going to talk about today, which is Prince Edward Island and other North Atlantic islands, what we do well and what we can do better as we go forward into the next 25 years to take us to 2050. And I hope I'm still here. I just thought I had the question this morning. How can Prince Edward Island be considered part of University of the Arctic and a northern island? But if you take a look at this lovely map, with Arctic at the middle, you can see where we fit on the different latitudes here. And I know that we're probably down in this area because here's Newfoundland way up here in the Labrador Sea, etc. But we do fit into that larger circle, and really happy to be part of this organization and the Northern and Arctic Island Studies Research Thematic Network of the University of the Arctic that Andrew and I have worked on with the other islands from across the North Atlantic. So here we are on the east coast of Canada in what we call the Maritime Provinces. And if you include Atlantic Canada, then you would also be including Newfoundland, which we're going to hear about next from Dr. Nick. And then over here, yes, Atlantic Canada. And here we are down here, little Prince Edward Island. We're about 5,660 square kilometers, a population of 180,000, which is smaller than some neighborhoods in Toronto. But we are a sovereign jurisdiction as a province of Canada. And so we enjoy a lot of powers that other similar sized islands like here over in Cape Breton, which I'm trying to see right there, and Anticosti Island, they do not have the same power that we do with our provincial jurisdiction. So that's one of the things that we need to take advantage of more strongly here in the Atlantic region. Because we're talking about sustainability, everybody knows this definition, most often defined as meeting the needs of the present with compromising the ability of future generations to meet theirs. And those three pillars, economic, environmental, and social. And I've always argued that culture should be a fourth, but of course we include it in the social. So I want to talk today about what we do well on islands here on Prince Edward Island, especially, and I think we can probably expand that out to other small islands around the world, and well, even in our own little Arctic and Northern Islands section. But we have our geography that we take advantage of. We are surrounded by water. It gives a natural beginning and end to the island and to the land that we have access to, but it's also a threshold, that edge, a threshold to the ocean and to all of those resources that are out there. And so that whole notion of being bounded but also connected, that's a beautiful way of living, I think, because we are unique and separate, but we're also part of the greater world and have the ocean at our fingertips, or our toe tips, or our boats. Many of us have size too, because we're small. We might be small, but quite often we take advantage of that size. But what we have going for us is the scale of things, scale being how in proportion we are to one another. And in islands, because it's a small scale, it often leads to some of those other things that I'll talk about in a minute, like nimbleness. We always are in connection in relation to other islands, other land masses, the sea and mainlands. So we have the center periphery going for us, that and if we can center ourselves at the center, often that's where our power comes from, instead of being reliant upon those outside forces like mainland forces. I love when Firouz was talking about paradiplomacy. This is what we do really well here on Prince Edward Island, looking out to other islands of a similar size and scale for those lessons, because it's through the lens of other islands' successes and failures that we're actually learning and making Prince Edward Island a better place to live as well. We have that isolated connectedness and using the sea as a road. I know in the wintertime here, those beautiful blue ocean waters will freeze and become ice, and it kind of cuts us off, but at the same time, it joins us. And so, generally we don't have large mammals here, but over different times in wintertime, actually large mammals will make it over to Prince Edward Island across the ice. And in the olden days, it was we had to use ice boats to get across. Now, of course, we have a bridge, and which Andrew and I talk about in our book called The Bridge Effect, and how that has changed our islandness or not. We have this rich landscape and seascape around us that we take advantage of. So those are some of the assets when it comes to geography. And I suppose that would fit in the environment category of the definition of sustainability. We also have economies. So we all know about economies of scope, or economies of scale rather, and on small islands, we often don't have good economies of scale because we are so small. But we also have this because we're connected to the rest of the world and we have to look outward, we have a larger scope, and it becomes part of our way of doing things, is looking out to the rest of the world for trading opportunities and partnering and collaborating with other places. And so and also I'm thinking of the scope of imagination, which I'll talk about in the next slide. We are rooted in place. We're very connected because we're small and have that strong attachment to place, that we are celebrating our fishing and our farming and our tourism. And those are the three main things that we have going for us on Prince Edward Island. Lately, we have a whole bio-alliance sector. We have other things that we've done, like take advantage of a closed Air Force base to create a center for airline technology, and in Summerside, which is our second largest city. So it's taking advantage of those places and our attachment to place that has been so strong here to create a rich and vibrant community. And that we're nimble, because we are small. We can move quickly. We can change on a dime and get we have access to our politicians, to our policymakers, and we can make things change, make things happen a little bit more quickly than in other places. Like moving that great big boat around. Well, we're little. We can move quickly. That asset-based approach, so ABC, which is asset-based community development, or I want to say that island-based development. These are some of the assets when we talk about culture. And often on Prince Edward Island, we talk about the slower pace of life, or how things are on island time. And it makes it a little bit more manageable for getting, just at a more human scale, as opposed to the fast-paced life of the city. So it attracts different kinds of people that, and we talk about the creative economy, that where people are actually putting, life, the quality of life ahead of money, but in turn creating a prosperity out of that is really rich here on Prince Edward Island. We because we're small and often have limited resources, we have to be ingenious with what we have, and out of necessity. And so that people power that we have going for us, I think, is a really strong asset. We have traditional knowledge that spans several generations back as settlers, and before that we had Indigenous people here that we need to be listening to, incorporating, collaborating with, and because they had such a strong knowledge of how this place works, that we're looking to them and their cultures for some of the solutions around climate change, for instance, as well as living in community. The community and kinship networks that we have created in these small places are very, very rich. And we are different. Because we are set apart from the mainland, we can use that differentiation to show that we have a distinctive culture. And when in South warm water islands, we talk about the 3 S's: sun, sea, sand, and sometimes sex and shopping. However, in the Northern Islands, we have ice, isolation, and indigeneity going for us, which I think is a really rich and storied relationship that we have with other folks. Of course, in small islands, we're always subject to outmigration, where the pushing of our people to go off and seek opportunities, but we're also getting in-migration, and sometimes we get some of our own back. And so as my friend Pete Hay from Tasmania has always said, the tragedy is not that our young people leave, it's that they don't come back. And so if they come back with the outside knowledge and influences and help to make this place a better place with their knowledges, I think it makes for a more rich society as well. And so this is when we start talking about islandness. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about, as Andrew knows, and many of the people on this call, that this is something unique to islands. And so the sense of belonging that you get here, that the living on a place where you feel deeply attached to a place and rooted in a place, and that you feel that you can give back to it, and that the island will be there for you. If you give to it, then it will be here for you, as well as, the community. And you get that reciprocity happening, which is so crucial to a successful and dynamic community. The way of life, which is inclusive, it's cohesive. We have culture here that is becoming not just 7 generations born and bred, but we are also a welcoming, most of the time, community for in-migrants, and we have lots of newcomers helping enrich the society and making for a diverse society, because we all know that strength comes in diversity. We have the identities, which are historic going back, and this contemporary identity that is based in newcomer technology, newcomer culture, and also sharing cultures with other islands and learning from them through these kinds of linkages, even what we're doing today. We know that we're a resilient community. We can turn on a dime, back to that nimbleness again. And it's part of our culture, part of our history, that we are resilient. Of course, we have to be, because environment, we're a small land, we only have so much land, we have to take care of it, but we also know that it is vulnerable. And so how do you care, especially when it comes to climate change? So what kinds of things are we doing to help mitigate climate change and adapt to climate change on islands? And at the core of it is that, and what we hope for all the time, the goal is that you have a vital community. So I like to think of islandness as our superpower, and I think that this is a lesson that we can share all across our small islands and across the north and around the world, certainly trying to make it happen here on Prince Edward Island. I want to just talk briefly before I end about the idea of small is beautiful. So E.F. Schumacher in 1973 published this book, A Small is Beautiful, Economics as If People Mattered. And because we are small, and because we have a very rich society, very closely connected, people do matter in these communities. And so how can we do things that are more place-based, where we're rooted in our communities and celebrate those things? So we're actually creating businesses and doing community-based tourism initiatives, instead of always being trying to attract the next big thing, the next shiny thing that brings in money. How about paying some attention to what we can do at the grassroots level and build up from there? And I think in doing that, and there are examples on islands all over the world that are punching above their weight, because they have been doing things rooted in community and then going off into the world with them. And we see this time and time again on small islands. And we often say PEI punches above its weight too in so many areas. In the 1980s, George McRoby, who's a British economist riffed off of Schumacher's book and came out with Small as Possible. And then he was over here on Prince Edward Island doing a lot of work around sustainable farming techniques and making, instead of going for the large industrialized farm, which was the way that we went in the 1970s with the Comprehensive Development Plan, which was kind of imposed upon us by the federal government. Instead of doing that, let's go back to small as possible and take a look at some of those farming techniques that were rooted more in the family farm and your organic farming, those kinds of things. So he was a huge proponent of that, and we really, really appreciated his attention to Prince Edward Island through his work. Just before I finish, I just want to talk a little bit about Fogo Island off the coast of Newfoundland and the approach that an entrepreneur there named Zita Cobb took about creating an island-based industry based on exclusivity of coming to this beautiful, beautiful, tiny, brutally honest island. You can see the rock there underneath that hotel, which is called the Fogo Island Inn. And what she was doing was taking a look at what this kind of place-based development could do, but through this economic nutrition label. And so how does the money, where does the money go actually? And most of it goes back into the island from this one place-based development that is just iconic in Atlantic Canada as a development. So are there other examples out there? And so that's one of the things that we look at to see where those examples are and see if we might be able to adapt them to our own place. So that's it. There's our little island Earth. And I'm hoping that, and you can see Prince Edward Island way underneath the swirling snows and everything. Really happy to be part of this and happy to take questions when the discussion time comes. Thank you. And I'm trying to find where the share button is. Is it off? No. Where did the share? Stop sharing. There it is. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Laurie. Lots to think about there as well, and some great examples of small-scale place-based development. So everyone, get your questions ready. You should be able to post in the Q&A if you have some questions about the scale of development that islands are likely to be facing in future. So we turn now to Dr. Nick Mercer, who is not all that far away from Laurie, because he's also in Prince Edward Island. Now, Nick is the Assistant Professor in Environmental Studies and Island Studies at UPEI, and he's a transdisciplinary, community-engaged scholar, and he studies the intersections of environmental justice and energy transitions in North Atlantic island communities, which is, you know, a very hot topic here in Shetland. And his current research explores water, energy, food security as an integral system in rural Newfoundland, and how innovations such as community energy and island microgrids can inspire transformative teaching and learning. So I think all ears in Shetland will be turned your way, Nick.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrew. Let me pull this up here. How am I looking, folks?
Very good.
I'm coming through okay? Awesome.
Yeah.
Hello, folks. Thank you so much for having me. As Andrew had so pleasantly introduced me, my name is Nick Mercer. I'm a settler researcher, and I work as an assistant professor of environmental studies and island studies at the University of Prince Edward Island. And I'm here to talk today about this really important concept for the year 2050 and beyond, energy sovereignty, particularly how it can be used to confront the risks of climate maladaptation on Northern Islands. So in my photo here, you'll see a picture of the island of Ponds. 85 indigenous people live on here in the Labrador Sea in Labrador, and it's a community I've worked with over a decade now. So you'll hear lots of reflections on my work with the island of Ponds in my presentation today. So for the Canadians in the room, you'll likely know that Canada is normally celebrated as a global leader with respect to renewable energy generation. I mean, we get 60% of our electricity generation from large-scale hydropower. And if you start to layer on other low-carbon sources of generation, like nuclear generation at 14, non-hydro renewables like wind, solar, biomass, we get well in excess of 80% of our electricity from non-emitting sources, with the balance made up from fossil fuels. So 12% being natural gas, being coal and coke. But you know, what brings me here today is where things differ really dramatically in the Canadian context is at the off-grid scale, right? Sometimes these big numbers, these nationwide numbers, can hide the little numbers, right? They can hide the smaller places. So I'm here to bring attention to scale and island sustainability. So where the electricity generation mix differs dramatically at this country is what we call the off-grid scale. So these are communities that aren't connected to a provincial or territorial electricity grid. You can see those big blue lines down in the Canadian south. And these are permanent settlements. So at least 5 years or longer, at least 10 dwellings. So that excludes things like temporary mining communities that are set up on a seasonal basis. And there's three things that I want you to know about these communities. Number one, the vast majority of them are dependent on diesel fuel. They don't have renewables like Canada does. So there's 258 of these communities. You see the dots all over the country. 190 of them are almost exclusively dependent on diesel fuel for space heating, for electricity, combined consuming something like 700 million liters of diesel fuel per year. So a huge amount of diesel consumption in these small communities. Second, Laurie, I loved your three I's, ice, indigeneity. We need to remember that these are predominantly Indigenous communities. So that's First Nations, Inuit, or Métis in the Canadian context. Again, a large majority of these communities, 170 of 258, identify as Indigenous in Canada. And, you know, I think the reason why Laurie hired me in the Island Studies Department, among other reasons possibly, is that islandness, you know, being an island, having characteristics of an island is really pervasive to this challenge. So if you look on the east coast of Canada, hopefully you can see my mouse, what I'm circling here. You know, we've got the island of Newfoundland. In the Gulf of St. Lawrence, we have Anacostia Island. We have Magdalen Islands, the Maggies, affectionately. If you go out west, we have Vancouver Island. We have the Haida Gwaii archipelago of islands. We'll shoot way up north. We have Banks Island, Victoria Island, Ellesmere Island, Baffin Island, Southampton Island. If you go along the Labrador coast, this little dot here out in the Labrador Sea, that's the island of Ponds, where I've worked most intimately. But we've got Williams Harbour. And I would argue as well that even the few of these communities that aren't islands, they're metaphorical islands. They're fly in, they're fly out. They're surrounded on three sides by water. They're heavily dependent on the mainland. So to understand the nature of diesel dependence on northern islands, we have to understand the nature of islands themselves. So those are the three characteristics I really want you to know. These communities are diesel dependent. They're predominantly Indigenous, and we can't understand this issue without understanding islands. So the question becomes, why should we care then, right? The existing literature tells us that these diesel generators, you see a picture of one here from the island of Ponds, familiar site in many island communities and nations. These diesel generators pose huge economic, environmental, social challenges for northern island communities. I'll give you a couple examples. From an economic perspective, this stuff is really expensive. So the average Canadian consumer pays about 12.5 cents a kilowatt hour for their electricity, where the average unsubsidized cost of diesel in an off-grid community is $1.30 a kilowatt hour. Staggering, over 10 times more expensive than what's being paid on the mainland. From an environmental perspective, these things contribute to global climate change. Moving this fuel around the small community poses a huge risk of fuel spills and leaks. Massive concern, you know, especially in Indigenous rural communities who highly value and remain dependent on the health of the land and the environment. Social issues, noise pollution. If you've ever been to one of these communities, these things are loud, noisy, disruptive, especially in quiet, isolated, idyllic northern environments. So I spent a couple minutes beating up on diesel there. But on the flip side, you know, clean energy projects at times have been promoted as a bit of a panacea or a silver bullet for island communities, right? We promote them for these host of social, economic, ecological reasons. You know, they create jobs, they generate taxes, they reduce greenhouse gas emissions, they generate community pride. We can build renewable-based tourism industries, and I'm certainly open to some of those benefits. But what I want to stress is that my research and the research of many others shows that in the absence of legitimate processes of community engagement, ownership, and control which are embedded in the worldviews of indigenous peoples and non-indigenous peoples, clean energy projects can create tensions of their own. And you see this picture here on my right from Labrador, a protest that says, "Don't poison Labrador." And this was a protest at the time where the mainland, they built a gargantuan hydroelectric facility in the center of Labrador. It flooded traditional indigenous lands. It led to methyl mercury accumulation in the water column. There was huge man camps associated with its construction and drug problems and social problems. So, clean energy is not necessarily sustainable energy, in my assessment. So the question that I have in my research, is, do these clean energy projects help to build or actually erode community autonomy for Northern Island communities? And, certainly they can help us build autonomy, and they help us do this in three ways. Number one, when one of these islands generates its own source of electricity, you're less dependent on imports from the mainland, right? If that's 10%, 50%, 100%, you're less dependent on the mainland. Two, if you sell renewable electrons, you can generate a bunch of money that you can then invest in self-identified island priorities, housing, healthcare, food, etc. Number three, if you own one of these projects, you can facilitate processes of self-decision-making and self-governance. But what I want to stress is these projects can also erode community autonomy in three main ways as well. Number one, oftentimes it's not islanders who own these projects. Instead, it's an outside government, it's an outside corporation, and if this is the case, this can lead to further intrusion of mainland models of resource governance into island communities. So a joke I always like to tell, is the island of Ponds, Labrador any better off if Walmart Canada owns a wind turbine in their community? I think not. Number two, these projects can create massive, massive, massive administrative burdens for small islands who are already operating at, near, or beyond capacity. And number three, these technologies, be it hydrogen, be it small modular nuclear reactors, they can unfairly expose islanders to the risks that are associated with novel technologies. So I would collectively refer to these as climate maladaptation. So Magnan et al. In a famous paper published in 2016 gave us a great definition of this term, but they describe climate maladaptation as an action that results in an undesirable or unintended outcome. This leads to increased vulnerability, which the action was meant to reduce. I've heard others call this the boomerang effect, which is a little bit more catchy. You have a great idea, you're trying to do something to advance sustainability, you throw the boomerang with good intentions, and then it turns around in the face. So you see an example of a northern solar energy project here on the right. This is on indigenous lands, and it's roped off with barbed wire fence. Right? This can displace access to berry picking grounds. It can displace access to sacred territories. It can displace access to medicine gathering territories. So to me, all risks of climate maladaptation. So what is the path forward then? In the pursuit of emissions reduction targets for 2030, 2050, how do we make clean energy technologies sustainable energy technologies for island communities? And I've landed on this notion of energy sovereignty or island energy sovereignty. And Avila Solero, another great author, gives us this definition, the right of individuals, communities, peoples to make their own decisions about energy in a way that's appropriate for their ecological, social, economic, cultural circumstance, and critically, as long as they do not affect others negatively. So I've kind of broken this down to three guiding concepts, which really inspire me in my work that I'd love to see in island jurisdictions everywhere. So A, being autonomy over complete energy life cycles, from the earliest energy planning decisions, operations, maintenance, through the decommissioning of projects, islanders should have choice. They know best about what will work in their community. B, building on Laurie's comments, the necessity of place-based development. These islands aren't empty. You can't do cookie cutter projects on them. You can't dream up a project on the mainland and just implement it without accounting for the unique social, cultural, economic, political circumstances of that island community. But the third piece I love about this definition as well is what we call cosmopolitan justice. So recognizing that we are not just citizens of our islands, we're citizens of the world. And what we do on our islands affects people globally, either positively or negatively. So if an island makes a decision, opens 100 coal plants, that hurts people globally, that's not really an act of sovereignty. That can be seen as an act of aggression. So autonomy, place-based development are important, but we have to account for our impacts as global citizens as well. So the last thing I'll add is a lot of these ideas I developed today are drawn from a paper I published late last year, working along the coast of Labrador. A grad student here at UPI, Tristan Atkins, co-published this with me. But really excitingly, 5 people from this Indigenous region itself are co-authors on the study: Debbie Martin, Brynwood, Amy Hudson, Amy Babcock, and Krista Oxford. So if you're interested in exploring these ideas anymore, you can learn a little bit more from us here. And thank you so much, folks, for the opportunity to make these remarks.
Thank you very much indeed, Nick. And there was certainly stuff there that would do very well in a discussion about energy, sustainable or otherwise, in Shetland at the moment. I don't think we've got any questions so far in the Q&A or the chat, so I'll just get started. We have a little bit of time for some questions. I just wondered, Nick, do you have any good examples so far of energy sovereignty at work, and also any bad examples?
Well, I promote my own work a little bit, I guess. So I've not only have we criticized the problems on the coast of Labrador, we've also advocated for solutions. So a few years ago, I undertook an expansive energy planning process in partnership with 9 of these remote Indigenous diesel-dependent communities, where those communities themselves defined what the most critical issues were to them, which surprised us in many instances what the issues were, but more importantly, what they saw as the possible solutions. So oftentimes, instead of these big, grand renewable energy projects or dams or nuclear facilities, islanders saw these really small, low-hanging fruit changes they could make to their energy systems that make a huge difference. So the island of Ponds collectively chose a high-efficiency wood stove heating project as their main sustainability priority. All the homes are diesel dependent, but wood is an integral part of the culture in Labrador. It's how people get on the land. It's how they spend time with their kids. It has a significantly improved environmental footprint compared to diesel. So we put a new high efficiency wood stove in every single home on the island of Ponds who asked for one. They themselves define the issues. They themselves pick the solutions. That's an example at a small scale that really keeps inspiring me today. A problem that I have is this rush to win to hydrogen globally. So in any island we look at, seemingly across the face of the earth, someone is targeting it, and someone is trying to turn it into a mass expanse of industrial wind facilities. So I'm working on the Port-au-Port Peninsula right now in Western Newfoundland. This is a small bounded area, 240 square kilometers, and a company has proposed to put 3,000 megawatts of wind energy on it. The data that we see suggests that half of this peninsula, 120 square kilometers, will be disrupted for wind turbines, for pads, for roads, for overhead wires. And 84% of the people who live there has said, no, thanks, we don't want this. This is completely counter to our way of life. So I think if we advance this notion of energy sovereignty, being autonomy, place-based development, cosmopolitan justice, we could very much confront the risks of some of these wind to hydrogen developments. Thank you so much for your question, Andrew.
Thanks, Nick. I've just got a follow-up one. I mean, that sounds great if you can promote energy sovereignty. But what happens if, I don't know, Canada decides that the island of Ponds is the place that it's going to help build Canadian energy security, and you know, that not just that it's also geopolitically important because of that. What do communities do in the face of that sort of thing?
Yeah, oftentimes these small islands are used to achieve bigger mainland foreign policy agendas, right? That's happening in Newfoundland right now. The Canadian federal government has signed the Canada-Germany Hydrogen Alliance, which is the driving force behind a lot of these projects, and they have a vision of modernity that does not necessarily match up with those islanders. So, you know, if I had any advice for policymakers, my simple advice would be social acceptance matters, right? These projects are not sustainable if the locals are not behind them. You will see protests, you will see regulatory delays, you will see legal cases, and in many cases in the Canadian context, we've seen huge renewable energy projects collapse, contracts be canceled because communities are up in arms. So we need to convince regulators about the importance of social acceptance, social buy-in, social license, and we need to find ways to institutionalize that, be it referendum, direct democracy, other forms of innovation, so that Islander voices can be heard.
Thank you very much indeed. So, do we have any questions amongst Pia, Laurie, and Nick yourselves that you would like to pick up with each other? Laurie, you put your hand up.
Yeah, I would love to chat with Pia a little bit more about habitability and what the uptake has been in these small islands. You say it's citizen science, and so how have people embraced this, and what are the results?
I was actually thinking about it when Nicholas was talking about this energy transition. It's exactly the same thing with habitability. It won't work if you put in a consultant. So it has to be done by the islanders themselves. And I would say that one of the big results, that's actually your area, Laurie, that the inner sustainability, that in many of these, or in several of these archipelago areas, the islanders on different islands have not cooperated before this. So now they have actually found each other. I would say that when you do the work, it also strengthens the society, no matter what the results are. But also talking about energy, when you look at the wheels, the circles, the most red sections you get when it comes to energy. And I guess many of you know that the European Union has put in quite a lot of money in this Clean Energy for EU Islands project. And there is, I think it's been going on now for almost 10 years. But it's also, even though the whole idea is to empower islanders, it comes from above. So it's it's difficult to make it work. And I can say that we, the islanders, we are so tired of it. We're exhausted trying to make these energy plans, but then you won't get any further because you just get money for that. And that the big money you won't get, that goes to somewhere else. So yeah, it's a big problem. Absolutely, the biggest sustainability problem is concerning energy. Although there are very good examples also of islands in Europe that are self-sufficient when it comes to energy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Pia.
Thank you, Pia.
You used this term when you were speaking, that of clean energy, right? And that's something I've been struggling with lately. You know, when you're working in these tiny, remote, isolated, bounded islands, you know, oftentimes we see the consequences of our actions more so than folks in big mainland areas, right? Like if you build a big wind energy project in Toronto, mainland Canada, we can ship all that waste somewhere else at the end of its life cycle. We have this ability to adapt and forget in these large continental land masses. But on small islands, like we have to oftentimes clean up our mess, and many of the things that come in don't come out at the end of the day. So I met a knowledge keeper in Labrador a few years ago. I gave a similar presentation, and he said, you need to stop using that clean energy term. He said, there's no such thing. He said, there's only cleaner energy. There's no clean energy. There's only cleaner energy, because they see it in their community. These solar panels come in, these batteries come in, all this construction material comes in, and then a lot of time it ends up in the dump and someone puts a match to it, right? There's so little that's clean about things that we manufacture on the face of the earth, and island lifeways and island ways of being based on minimalism and low consumption have so much to inform the clean energy debate.
of the clean air education debate. Yeah, well, we've just got time for one more comment from each of our speakers in this session. Looking forward to 2050. What, you know, the thing about these sessions is to try and imagine a good future, because if you can imagine it, well, it might happen. So looking forward to 2050, what would you like to see when it comes to sustainable communities in Canada and Finland? Starting with Laurie.
I think just really building on our strengths and keeping and being open to the technologies that are changing that might benefit us and not hinder us, and how we can adapt these outside influences to the local level, not cutting ourselves off from the world, but being part of the world, yet at the same time really celebrating that place, what we do best here, that's attachment to place, using our roots as a tool. And I love that roots, R-O-O-T-S, and roots, R-O-U-T-S, I think is fundamental to islands. I think in the north, we in those northern and Arctic islands that are further north than we are, it's again being open to opportunities there and working together. I keep coming back to thinking about islands as property, and which is why the imperial notions and colonial notions of acquiring strategic land for whatever reason, I think we need to make sure and continue doing the kinds of things that Firouz and Gary and Merritt were talking about, is making sure that we take charge of those places and don't succumb to the external threats. So yeah, just really building on what we do best, but being open.
Thank you very much, Laurie. And Pia, what about yourself? What would you like 2050 to be like in the Finnish archipelago?
Well, in my PhD, I hope to look into the research of Elinor Ostrom, I think she's one of two female Nobel Prize winners in economy. She's saying that small societies are more resilient than bigger ones. And I do think that small islands hold the key to when it comes to sustainability, not because people or islanders are more sustainable than others, but they have to be. For example, looking at circular economy, and so I do think that islands have the possibility to serve as good examples for the rest of the society. So that's where we're striving.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed, Pia. And Nick, last comment from yourself.
Thank you so much, Andrew. I guess a couple of things. Number one, I'm trying to keep a critical eye on myself, my colleagues, you know, in the decades ahead, on where ideas originate and where they come from, because I suspect lots of times they don't come from islanders themselves, and somebody else's narrative or goals or philosophies are being advanced. I had a Mi'kmaq teacher, an Indigenous man in Newfoundland, one time told me, if you approach us with a fully baked idea, you've already failed your ethical obligations to us, right? We are already on the defensive. We are already reacting to your idea. So I'm trying to put idea initiation and leadership back in the hands of the community, which I think can solve so many of these problems. And then just quickly, I'm really concerned about the limits of representative democracy for island communities. I mean, we have 4 members of parliament here in Prince Edward Island amongst a sea of 350 members of parliament across the country, and it is so difficult for our voices, all island voices, to be heard in those systems. So I would like to see more radical enactments of direct democracy, energy democracy, community autonomy across scales. Again, islanders know best, and if you just empower them to decide, I think we can avoid a lot of these tensions. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Wonderful. So again, another session with lots of points to take away, lots of things to think about. and 3 excellent presentations again. So thank you very much. The next session is going to be chaired by Laurie. So I am going to hang up my whatever it is when you're being a chair and pass on to Laurie. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, for being such a terrific chair and keeping us on track. Oh my gosh, we're a minute ahead of schedule. This is great. I am absolutely delighted to be chairing this session, which is close to my heart, being a writer and poet and musician. It's called Speaking of the Future, the Role of Language, Culture, and Heritage. And I think that islands, we have so much richness in these areas, as I alluded to in my talk. And so very delighted to have 3 speakers coming from 2 different places, Dale Jarvis from Newfoundland and Labrador, Simon Clarke from Shetland, and Suin from Shetland, Suin Carden. And I would love to invite Dale Jarvis to come on up to the square, the rectangle. And is he here? I'm not seeing Dale yet. Oh, good. Do you have a PowerPoint or anything? Or are you just going to talk?
Nope. I'm going to share it now.
Awesome. Okay, let me introduce you properly. So Dale is a folklorist and author and an adjunct professor at the Department of Folklore at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, and the executive director of Heritage Newfoundland and Labrador. He helps communities to safeguard living heritage and historic places. Dale's been working for Heritage NL since 1996 and holds a Bachelor of Science in Anthropology and Archaeology from Trent University in Ontario and an MA in Folklore from Memorial University. He served on the UNESCO consultative body to the Intergovernmental Committee for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage and regularly teaches workshops on oral history, cultural documentation, and public folklore. So thanks, Dale. And I'm so pleased that you've been involved with our NAISR from the very beginning, hosting the very first Yarns and Yarns symposium that we did. And I'm just delighted to hear what you have to say. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And yes, hopefully we will get back and have another Yarns and Yarns here in Newfoundland. So that was a very great introduction, I think, to who I am and what I do. Heritage NL, just to give a little bit of context, we are a Crown agency. We're kind of half government. We're government when government wants something, and then we're not when we want something. That's how I always explain it. We have been around, Heritage NL has been around for over 40 years now. Originally started off dealing specifically with heritage buildings, but since then it has expanded to include the portfolio for intangible cultural heritage. So we do a lot of work with communities around safeguarding aspects of traditional culture. And over the last couple of years, the last 5 years or so, one of our major projects has been around craft at risk. And so we've developed a craft at risk list for the province of Newfoundland and Labrador, largely based on the Heritage Craft Association in the UK, their red list. They were very helpful in getting us set up. The craft at risk list brings attention to some of those crafts and skills that are in decline in our communities. And so we've done all kinds of work around workshops and mentor apprentice programs. But one of the things that we've been doing more of lately is just working on skills inventories and doing this at a very community-based level. So going in, working with a community that wants to do an inventory and identifying people in those communities that have broadly kind of traditional skills of some kind. I think one of the challenges when we start talking about skills and crafts is that quite often here in Newfoundland and Labrador, the immediate assumption is that we are talking about textile crafts, which are fairly well established here. And we have a really great tradition of things like rug hooking that you can see here, and knitting traditions. But we recognize that it is broader than that. So we're always trying to find those people in communities that do things beyond that, beyond the textile traditions, and to showcase some of them. So this is an example from Cormac on the west coast of the island. We identified one of our local beekeepers. It was really great to hear some earlier references to like small scale farming and agriculture. We find that that's really an important topic of discussion in our rural island communities. We try as well to identify people who are sort of those established people in the community, the older people in the community who have skills, like Clifford George, who's a local expert on the Newfoundland pony. But then we recognize that there are also young people in communities, and making young people feel like they are part of a continuous culture, that we have them engaged in this process is really important. So this is Shanna Brown. If you want to learn how to play the button accordion or want to learn how to make a rug, she is your young lady that you can go to in the community of Whiteway. Because we have an interest in built heritage as well, we're also really interested in skills that are related to landscape and vernacular architecture. In particular, because we have a conservation interest in those things. And so we identify the people in communities that have those practical skills. This is Al Dwyer from Tilting on Fogo Island. Great local tour guide and storyteller, musician, but also a great maker of fences. And we spent a morning out in the field with Al learning how to make traditional fences there on Fogo Island. From this material, we try to develop useful tools. The inventory is one way of elevating and valorizing people's work. We want to show how that work can be taken and applied in a replicable sort of way in other communities that we work with. So we started a series that we call our Living Heritage Economy series, which is a series of case studies looking at what people were doing around traditional skills and how they were using those skills for economic development in their community or region. This was the first one we did back in 2018 with Janet Peter, who's a local felting and crafter, felting artist, how she uses local folklore. Here's a lovely mermaid from some local legend that has come to life through Janet's work. We love that she uses traditional tropes and traditional themes in a contemporary way. And the list of case studies that we've done include things like how people preserve local patterns for knitwear, working with the Economusée concept, how not-for-profits are developing skills training and revitalizing traditions, and then work around creating social enterprises and heritage tourism, if we can do that in a somewhat sustainable sort of way. So we work with our partners. What we love is where we can engage with heritage places that also have an intangible cultural heritage component. This is one of our great fun projects that we've been doing over the last 2 years, which is our Sheep to Sock weekend. We partner with a local historic farmhouse that runs educational programs, and we showcase the whole process from sheep to sock. So we have shearing that takes place on site, and then we do the process of everything from carding and spinning to the end product of knitting. And we also do things like weaving and rug making and that sort of thing. This was another great example of getting young people involved. We had 2 different weavers who came with their looms. Both of them brought one of their grandchildren. You can see this young fellow there in the background weaving away. And I think that this was really great for a family sort of event, that it isn't just old people that are involved in heritage. It's young people who are learning and carrying on some of these traditions. One great example from Labrador I can think of is the revitalization of the Inuit drum dancing tradition that has been happening there over the last decade or more. One of the great projects that has happened there is bringing the teenagers who are learning drum dancing into the kindergarten programs. So the young kids get to see the cool teenagers doing this kind of work. That's way more important to transmission than having some old fellow with white hair like me coming in and talking about it. So wherever we can get this kind of intergenerational sharing of skills, we try to do it. And this is just a picture looking out from that 150-year-old farmhouse out towards some of our participants there. So we are interested in this business of maintaining and safeguarding and trying to help a lot of these sites achieve a certain amount of financial stability. We recognize, and we work very closely with our Museums Association, we recognize that not every community can be, or not every place can be a museum. We need to think a little bit more broadly. Looking forward into the future, we are really dealing with the effects of climate change sometimes in very dramatic ways. This August was one of our hottest and driest Augusts on record. We had a massive series of wildfires in the Conception Bay region, but an hour and a half out of St. John's, which is the capital city. Massive damage to these places. This is this article about it caused $70 million in commercial residential damages. And it's important to note that this 70 million number, it says there at the bottom, is insured losses. One of the challenges we're finding is that in a lot of rural communities, it is becoming, in Canada, increasingly difficult for anyone to get any kind of insurance. So the 70 million is actually much, much higher because many of the properties that were lost did not have insurance, which is something that is becoming an issue that we're trying to deal with across rural communities in Canada. This is one of the examples of the buildings in that region that was designated by our organization a number of years ago. This is the Crowley property there in Ochre Pit Cove. Really lovely example of kind of a 100-year-old fishing family premises with all its little outbuildings and fences. Really great example of how people were more self-sufficient. You know, they fished, they farmed, they processed, they stored materials. This was one of the properties that got caught up in that wildfire. So that's what it looked like in July. This is what it looks like today. And when we go to that site, one of the only things that remains there is this, the base of its root cellar. So as we look forward into a future that is more variable, we know we are going to have more concerns around drought and wildfire and storm surge. We need to start thinking a little bit more proactively about how we build in these places. And we feel at Heritage NL that one part of this looking forward must include looking back at the way in which things were done. We have an interest in those traditional skills, for example, and so rather than building say, for example, wooden boardwalks in our parks and walking trails, why aren't we building using local stone and doing it in a way that is more sustainable, that's not reliant on imported timber and nails, where we're actually using stuff on site. And over the past years, that kind of looking back and teaching some of these skills has become increasingly important. This is a workshop we did with some municipal workers in that region a number of years ago. That's Kenny Tuak, a 5th generation stonemason there in the center, passing on some of his skills. We also know that for things like food security, which is an incredible issue in island communities, sometimes Our ancestors knew how to do things that we've sort of forgotten, things around preservation and how to build root cellars. And so groups like ours from a heritage perspective, but also groups like Food First NL who deal with food security, we are thinking about some of those older, greener technologies and how we encourage communities to do that. We also recognize that these skills have an economic value. This is Thimble Cottage here, which was part of our Sheep to Sock program. Over the past year, we've started a project around window restoration, teaching local people how to restore wooden windows instead of bringing in vinyl windows, petroleum-based vinyl windows from the mainland and the green footprint that involves. So these are some of the projects that we've been working on. This is our heritage carpenter, Chris, here restoring a window from the community of Brigus in Conception Bay, teaching workshops to the Shorefast employees and the town of Fogo employees out on Fogo Island so that they have those skills to do the work at the local level. And also doing research, doing academic research on the benefits of these things, the ecological and cultural benefits of heritage conservation. The current vision for that particular project is to turn it into a social enterprise so that we actually have a heritage site that is teaching these skills, doing work on other heritage sites and generating revenue for themselves at the same time. So more and more, these kind of more circular patterns of safeguarding are what we are looking at when we look forward to the future. That's me in a cellar, in a root cellar there, always looking for an excuse to crawl into someone's cellar. And if you want more information on what we are doing around heritage sustainability, you can find us at heritagenl.ca, or you can look at our blog at ichblog.ca. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Dale. Oh my gosh, you guys are doing so much fantastic work in Newfoundland and Labrador. And when I met you way back in 2012, I think you were just getting going, and it's just so amazing to see this the trajectory, and then this whole full circle going back to tradition as a greener and more sustainable way of doing things. So I'm looking forward to the discussion after, when we're all finished. So what we have. Originally, we were going to have Dr. Simon Clarke from Shetland speaking, but he unfortunately can't make it. I think he is tied up with a Viva, perhaps. And so maybe getting more PhD students into the world. This is fantastic. So thanks for your service, Simon, but sorry you can't be here with us today as planned. So we're going to go right to Dr. Suin Carden. Sean, are you ready?
I am. Thank you very much.
Excellent. Well, let me introduce you properly, and then we'll get you set up. So Dr. Suin Carden is a lecturer in the Center for Island Creativity in Shetland's University of Highlands and Islands. She teaches on UHI's Master of Arts in Art and Social Practice and services research students in creative practice. With a particular interest in island places, her research includes examination of contemporary maker cultures around the knitting of Shetland and Ireland, and arts-based research with the Shetland #Shetland crew of care experienced young people. She's a Scottish Book Trust New Writers Awardee for poetry. A woman after my own heart. Congratulations. So I would like to invite you to share your screen with us, and we'll hear what you have to tell us today.
Well, thank you very much. And today I'm going to be speaking not about knitting for a change. It was wonderful to hear Dale's talk touching on craft, because often that's what I'm talking about in these kind of contexts. But given the theme of the panel and the format of today, and some recent things that have been happening around Shetland language, I thought I'd just use this opportunity to mention a few things about the political and cultural moment in which the Shetland language finds itself. So I'm not a linguist, unlike some people who are very probably here, but as an anthropologist, I'm interested in communities where different languages meet, what people think about languages, and how languages are kind of put to use as expressions of and claims about identity and home. So I'm just going to drop right in, keeping it brief, by telling you about a recent political event in Shetland. So the Scottish First Minister, John Swinney, visited Shetland last month and spoke at a public event which was hosted by Scottish National Party candidate for the Scottish Parliament, Hannah Mary Goodlad. And in this event, the role of language in Shetland's future was notably prominent. The candidate, Hannah Mary Goodlad, opened the event with a speech in Shetland, in the Shetland language, explaining that since her recent return to live here, where she's from, she was refamiliarising herself with the language and finding it valuable. The first speaker on the panel was musician and broadcaster Claire White, pictured here, who spoke both in and about Shetland, giving an impassioned account of its importance for her own relationship to the place. She presented the First Minister with a copy of a recent book by linguist Vivica Villupalai and Roy Mullay called Shetland, A Young Language with Auld Roots, which she presented to the First Minister. Claire White also made a plea for Shetlanders to respond to a current government consultation about the Scottish census, asking for Shetland language use to be specifically asked about and therefore recorded. Other speakers at the same event on the panel included the editor of a local press outlet, the Shetland News, which has published many letters and opinion pieces in Shetland, especially recently, and a director of a local renewable energy company that's called after the Shetland word for spring, vor. So this event is just one example of how Shetland is being intentionally made audible and visible in public life in particular ways that it might not have been in decades past. Goodlad is not the only political candidate or elected representative to use Shetland in public statements, of course. Alex Armitage of the Green Party comes to mind, who frequently makes an effort to speak and write in Shetland, and I'm sure Beatrice Wishart, our previous Lib Dem MSP, has made public statements in Shetland as well. Probably representatives from other parties have done it as well. I don't want to leave anybody out, but it definitely appears to have stepped up in frequency in recent years, if I think back to when I arrived in 2016. The highlighting of Shetland in this kind of public context is a reaction against the former denigration of Shetland, like lots of minoritised languages, as being unsuitable for official or sophisticated communication. It's also interesting to see it taken beyond the realms of poetry and literary writing into news coverage, and beyond sectors that are immediately associated with cultural heritage, such as Shetland knitting, into less obvious sectors like renewable energy. There's a long-standing voluntary organisation called Shetland Forwards, which has done a lot of work since 2004 on promoting Shetland dialect, especially in education and publishing, and through making online dictionaries available. The authors of the new grammar book also have an online presence called I Hear Thee, which includes linguistic information presented bilingually, plus interactive elements like Shetland Wordle. The current campaign to get questions about Shetland language use on the Scottish census can be seen as a quest for official status, support and recognition for Shetland as more than a nostalgic collection of pretty words. As Duchesne and Humbert argue, censuses and surveys are always embedded in political projects and constitute a complex combination of scientific and socio-political arguments that shape the way languages and speakers are conceived of. Previous Scottish censuses have included options for recording the use of English and Scots, among other things. It's unclear whether all or most speakers of Shetland would describe themselves as speaking Scots, usually, so there's at least the potential for confusion in how people answer versus how the results are interpreted. The argument of Villupalai and Mullay's book is that Shetland doesn't descend from English, even if it has many similarities with it, but is a blend of Scots, Norn, and the Low Germanic languages. And they also argue that it's different enough from Lowland Scots to be treated as a variety in its own right, belonging within the bigger Scots macro area. I think it's fair to say that there's not a consensus at the moment within Shetland or among Shetland speakers about how best to support, promote, or think about the island's linguistic diversity. Points of debate include all the classic ones in this kind of situation, things like the terms dialect and language, the benefits of standardisation, questions of ownership and belonging, which can get quite fraught sometimes in language situations, and implications for language rights and the distribution of resources. However, regardless of all the debates and all the questions of officialdom, of course, thank heavens, people get on with using language in their own ways in the wild. So you can see a lot of Shetland language use on social media, particularly on Facebook, which is still a really heavily used platform for local organising and discussion. There's a group called We're Middertongue, which shares knowledge about language, but the casual Facebook user is likely to come across people writing in their own versions of Shetland in quite mundane contexts like buy and sell groups, accommodation groups, or commenting on local news articles, every kind of local interest group really. And that includes local main group Ristead Neeps, so I've chosen some of the less scurrilous contributions from them to share here. Linguistic diversity can, of course, be a useful tool for marketing and place branding. Duchesne and Heller wrote a while back about the twin poles of language ideology in what they call late capitalism as pride and profit. Long ago, I wrote about similar issues in relation to the Irish language in Belfast, which is obviously a really different context. But as Callan suggests, experiencing foreign languages provides the tourist with a sense of transcendence from the mundane and a token of authenticity in the new surroundings, if incomprehension is not an overwhelming difficulty. This makes Shetland, with its relatively high degree of comprehensibility for English speakers, well placed as a tool for tourism and place marketing. We see this in the window display of Jameson's of Shetland's wool shop during Shetland Wool Week in 2018, and also in the social media presence of businesses like Island Larder on the right here, whose Instagram bio is the sweetie shop with an accent. Island Larder shares lots of behind-the-scene videos of their staff speaking in their own Shetland voices, which attract interesting comments from around the world and I'm sure boost their online confectionery sales. So, thinking of the future, I wouldn't for a moment try to guess what comes next for Shetland's own language use or language politics. But given that we are here to talk about the future, I just thought I would end with some of the questions that present themselves. Maybe others have ideas or experiences from elsewhere that might give us some clues here. So what will be the consequences of having access to a more standardised orthography? Now that Volopoli and Mullay's book details and argues for one system of spelling, will that be adopted generally or in certain circumstances? Will it open up new possibilities for teaching and learning? Will it make native speakers feel afraid of spelling it wrong, or on the other hand, more likely to use it because it's legitimised as a written as well as an oral language? How does Shetland's linguistic future relate to ongoing debates about autonomy, whatever that means in practice here? How does Shetland's evolving language politics relate to those of Scotland? And I'm thinking especially here of the struggles of Gaelic-speaking communities to survive, as studied by UHI's Crothair O'Gilligan. And what about the language politics of other island places, which I hope some of you might be able to fill us in about today? So thanks very much for the opportunity to speak, and I'll stop sharing my screen here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suin. That's really fantastic. It just reminds me of Prince Edward Island, where Scots Gaelic was outlawed, or not outlawed, but discouraged, and people stopped speaking it in the homes for those exact same reason, that English was seen as the way forward economically, culturally, etc. And so we don't have any native Gaelic speakers anymore, but they've been trying to bring it back into the language, into use, which is really fantastic. Thank you for bringing that. And I love all of the stuff going on in the chat with the shared words too. I don't know if you have a chance to look at it, Suin. It's
Yes.
really neat to see these shared words that are coming up across the different cultures here in the North Atlantic. So yay, fantastic. Wow, okay, those two are so rich and they're so interconnected. And I would love to just start the chat with a couple of questions and then open it up to some of the other questions that we have in the chat. But Dale, when you were speaking about the traditions and that circularity mess going back, the old ways are becoming cool again, right? And I remember when I was in Fogo Island, when Zita Cobb was saying that we're only 8 funerals away from being able to build a boat, a wooden boat, she was referring to. And the fact that I remember we had a chat about knitting and wool socks versus acrylic socks, but what is authentic, right? Because people are now, even though the wool sock was the old way of doing it, acrylic socks work better, just like fiberglass boats work better. So I'm curious about how those new technologies are gaining ground as being part of, quote, the authentic Newfoundland culture. Oh, Dale, you're on mute. Are you seeing the button right up at the top in, nope, we lost him. Maybe he'll be back in a sec. While he's coming back, I'm also curious about how, with newcomers coming into our islands, how we see each other in the communities as well. So yeah, okay, I think Dale's on his way back in.
Yeah.
Andrew, go ahead, Dale.
A good example of technology there, working when it working when it not working. Yeah, the idea of authenticity is really, really interesting. And the boat building thing is a really good example of that. The people got rid of wooden boats for a reason. There were new technologies that came along, and everyone wanted a better motor and a fiberglass hull and all those kinds of things. One of the first projects that Fogo Island did when they started up the Shorefast initiative was they introduced punt races. So kind of giving a reason for people to start building wooden boats again, and sort of reinvigorating that tradition. So people didn't need a wooden boat to go fishing anymore, but now here was this reason why you needed to build a boat. And talking about that link between language and culture, there's a great word in Newfoundland English that is cranky. So a cranky boat is a boat that is likely to tip. And if you are out fishing and you are hauling up cod traps, you don't want a cranky boat. So boat builders evolved strategies to make boats that were not cranky. If you want to win a punt race, you need to be able to turn fast. And so you want a cranky boat. And so because the boat builders are conversant in these things, they are able to use traditional knowledge to adapt that tradition to fit local circumstances. So the boat builders were deliberately introducing crankiness into their boat building. And so when we talk about authenticity, I think sometimes the challenge is when we start imposing authenticity from outside of a community, we are sort of ignoring the actual process of tradition. Healthy traditions are that are ones that can adapt to situations. And when we try to pickle and preserve a tradition, it's no longer traditional. It becomes something else. So, and I think this goes back to some of what Nick was saying about letting communities have the say about what is important to them. I always defer to the community about what is traditional and what isn't, because they know and I don't. So when I see people reinventing tradition and using it for ways that address a community need, I think that is an example of a really healthy tradition. And I don't think those people are any less knowledgeable about the history and the process that has gone into its evolution. But yeah, I think allowing for some of that play, and we've seen that with regards to textile traditions, you know, where people in the past have kind of thought, oh, we don't want local wool. We want to bring in all our wool from Italy. You know, we want the good wool. And now we're recognizing in rural communities all across the North Atlantic region that those local sheep, the local wool, that's actually our selling point. And so maybe we are doing things with that we didn't do in the past. Maybe we're making high fashion pieces that we never would have done before. But in doing so, we're keeping those traditions alive and relevant.
Lovely. Yeah, relevance is a huge issue and I think a really important point as we move forward, and it's part of the evolution of culture. And Suin, I'm seeing the parallels then with language. Would you like to speak a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, I noticed in the chat there was a question, is Norn/Ninorn, sorry if I've mispronounced that, experiencing a true effort of revival, or is it a minority trend? So I suppose the kind of Shetland language that I'm talking about isn't actually Norn, it's a descendant of it, if you like. It's something that grew out of a mixture of that and Scots and Low Germanic languages. So it is quite different, and certainly in that sense of evolution, it's also something that exists in a context where English is a hugely dominant language. So of course things are constantly changing, and I think one of the things that the grammar book, one of its main points is that the underlying grammar might have survived more than the vocabulary words in a lot of people's speech and in experiences. So it's definitely changing all the time, and I don't think anybody would want it to stop changing. Certainly in the case of language, you invent it by doing it, you have to use it. So there's no point trying to sort of crystallize it or stop it changing, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that there's a question for Dale, which kind of follows on what you just said, Suin, and that is reflecting on what you were saying about traditions. How do you balance that with the fact that intangible cultural heritage is also something that evolves? So yeah, go ahead, Dale.
Yeah, so and I think when you look at the 2003 UNESCO Convention on ICAs, if you look at in the preamble, the very basic definitions of what intangible cultural heritage is, evolution is in there. It is about things that evolve in response to community and environment. So I think that is one of the things we need to be aware of when we talk about we sort of have stopped using the word conservation, because conservation kind of has this idea that you're keeping thing in a certain position. The charter uses the word safeguarding a lot, and that's kind of what we're doing. What we are doing with our ICH work is really safeguarding the viability of traditional knowledge, with the recognition that that will evolve in response to community and environment.
Yeah, I really love that. And thinking about the culture caught like a dragonfly in amber, it can't, right? It has to change and evolve in order to keep up. And I thinking about in Prince Edward Island, we have a number of newcomers, as many islands do, as we experience demographic change, and they are bringing in their own cultures and traditions and trying to make a place here so that they can see themselves reflected back into the see themselves reflected in Prince Edward Island culture. I'm just wondering, as part of that evolution, is that happening a lot in Newfoundland as well, where you are incorporating some of these newcomer cultures into the old ones?
Yeah, I know Andrew was around for our Mummers Festival a while back. So we have this great Christmas tradition here in Newfoundland of dressing up and going from house to house, similar to the guising traditions in other parts of the world. So we have a Mummers Festival that we've been running for over a decade now. And last year, we actually partnered with the local Ukrainian community, which has seen an incredible growth over the past couple of years with the conflict in Ukraine. And so we partnered with a couple different Ukrainian cultural organizations to showcase Ukrainian Christmas traditions. And there are some really remarkable similarities in terms of those masking traditions and calendrical customs that happen at the end of the year. So yeah, I think it's something that we are aware of, and we are always looking for ways to explore and incorporate some of those traditions. We have a great storytelling tradition here on the island, and we recognize that other people are coming with their own really distinct storytelling traditions. And so there's been a real effort to kind of reach out and bridge those communities and have it not just be about kind of that Anglo-Irish or Indigenous heritage we want to showcase. One of the great documents that came out in the early years when Museums Galleries Scotland was doing work around intangible cultural heritage right back in the early 2000s. I think Napier University was doing work on it, and they made a point of talking about intangible cultural heritage in Scotland, not the intangible cultural heritage of Scotland. Mm-hmm. And we kind of take a similar approach here. We're interested in people's culture and expression, wherever their community of origin may be. They still have a culture that they are bringing, and it has a meaning for our evolving coastal communities. We are seeing an explosion of Filipino workers here on our island, and it's amazing. You go in the smallest communities now, in rural communities, and you can buy Filipino food in the grocery store now. It's remarkable, and I think there's a great opportunity to kind of explore points of similarity.
For sure, and that fusion that comes from culinary traditions mixing, it's a beautiful thing, and again helps to create inclusive communities for these people who are coming in, and also broadening the locals' perspective and even changing our taste buds a little bit, which is really terrific. Andrew, I saw early on you had put your hand up. Did you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make?
Well, it was just a comment to follow on from what Suin was saying, that UHI Shetland will have a Shetland plan. And I've been talking about that with Beth, sort of head of research here at the college, who's got some great plans ahead for bringing Shetland into the college, not just as an add-on, but as an integral part of everyday life, because it is, but it's sort of hidden. So she's really interested in doing that. And also having a conference on island languages sometime maybe in next year, to bring in experience from other island communities where Indigenous languages have been ignored or threatened, and for some of their background information, like the revitalization of Manx is a good one, and then they're doing interesting things in the Channel Islands as well for their versions of Norman French, and then obviously Gaelic in Northern Ireland. There's all sorts of interesting things underway. So the college is very interested in being part of that and being a I don't know what the right word is. I'm supposed to say battering ram. That doesn't sound very good, but sort of getting the ball rolling.
Catalyst.
A catalyst, yeah, that's better than battering ram. Yeah, a catalyst for Shetland in the community.
That's great.
Sorry, just one other thing. I just put in the chat a link to one of the works of Uli, who's a professor of creative ethnography with us at Institute for Northern Studies. So he is looking at that intersection of ethnography, i.e. folklore and culture and traditions, but how it's being done creatively today by communities and by people, so that it's not just traditional, it's a living process that's taking place. And he's written quite a lot on that. And he was involved in Belfast as well in the Institute for Creative Ethnography too. So there's just a link to one of his papers on Are You or Could You Be Indigenous? A Perspective from Europe. So
wonderful. Similar to, I think that if this conference were to happen, it'd be fantastic to get some of our Mi'kmaq educators over, trying to revitalize the Mi'kmaq language in schools, and around Prince Edward Island now some of our signage even is in Mi'kmaq as well as English, similar to what's happened in Nova Scotia, where you have the Gaelic and English and Mi'kmaq, so 3 different
That'd
signs
be great,
on
yeah.
it. Although they do I think it's kind of derogatory when they say the tartanization of Nova Scotia. It's unfortunate that they will use that term, but I think that it's a very rich way of probably, a much more inclusive way. So there's a question there for you, Suin, in the chat from Mari. In terms of the advancement of the Shetland language, do you think that it should be to the extent that we have Shetland language schools, like we have Gaelic schools? And do we really want all government documentation published in all official languages in Shetland, as I think happens in Norway, where you have the standard Norwegian, Norsk, and Sami? Good question.
It's a great question. I'm not sure it's one that I should be the one to answer. I think it's a question that Shetland speakers will need to answer. And really, I think that the most important thing anyone can do to advance a language is to speak it and read it and write it and use it. And the question about education is really interesting, because that's been a running theme really for lots of local organisations and actors around Shetland language issues. So I mentioned the group called Shetland Forwards, who have been working since 2004, and they over past decades have taken quite a focus on education and getting Shetland into existing schools. And again, I would see that as partly pushing back against the historical, really common phenomenon of people being told off for using their own kind of language at school. The question about government documentation, we have lots of interesting stuff happening around this in Northern Ireland, where I'm from as well, obviously, around Ulster Scots, English and Irish. So I am well aware with all of the complexities around that. And I think when we're talking about issues around language rights and resources, that's the sort of thing that people tend to bring up. So I think Shetland might be a really interesting place to watch over the next wee while. And I'd love to see where it ends up. I'll certainly be watching with huge interest. Whether or not there ends up being a Shetland question in the Scottish census, I think the debate around that will be really interesting. If it did happen, interpreting the results would be really interesting. But I don't think I'm the one to be campaigning for or against that sort of thing myself, as somebody who just lives here.
Lovely diplomatic answer. But so true, because we have to be careful how, as scholars and researchers, we portray ourselves and get ourselves out there in the world. I think that at this stage, if there's no more major questions coming in, or any questions coming in the chat, if both Dale and Suin would just like to sum up, based on the conversation that we've had, and if there's any theme that you would love to see us going forward in the next 25 years, that's really burning. Yeah. Dale, do you want to go?
Sure. Well, just thinking about this conversation here, and that link between language and craft, I think is something we haven't really talked about. I know that there are certain places here that really struggle with language retention and language training, that there is an older generation of fluent speakers and a younger generation of people who are not. And I think craft is one of those places, again, getting back to that idea of multi-generational learning. I had a conversation a while ago with Seamus MacDonald at the Highland Village in Iona. He's their Gaelic language specialist there in Nova Scotia. And we were talking about craft, because there really is an interest in traditional arts and knitting and those kinds of things. And we were talking about what about creating glossaries around those crafts, and then having classes that are not language classes, but craft classes, and then using that language as a part of that craft class. I know that's been really important in Labrador and some of the Inuit communities, that craft classes are just a really good way to ensure that Indigenous languages are spoken kind of conversationally. So yeah, I think, I don't know, I'd be interested to know what Suin thought about that, because I know you have an interest in all of
absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful, really important idea and point about creating contexts where skills, sort of linguistic skills and craft skills, work together. There's an example in Shetland in the organisation called Shetland Pirimakers, Shetland Little Knitters, which is a voluntary organisation which stepped into a perceived gap in especially knitting education and knitting being passed on. So it's volunteers who tend to be older women who teach primary school age children very specific, defined as Shetland Fair Isle knitting skills and techniques. And through that sort of thing, where you have that intergenerational stuff happening, and you have an activity that's not school, even if it's happening in or close to a school, that could be a good venue. I know Viveka Vallopillai has a chapter in a different book, which is actually about craft contexts as transmission spaces for language in Shetland. So there's definitely examples of that happening. And I think there's probably lots of more potential for it to happen.
Lovely. Wow, this has been such a rich discussion. And if you've been following along in the chat, there's so many wonderful ideas and questions and examples going on as well. So thank you, everybody, for chiming in there in the chat. So I'm going to, let's take about an 8-minute break. We've been going for close to 3 hours. It's time to get up and move a little bit, maybe a bio break or a nutrition, a tiny snack. And we'll be back here at about 1 minute before the hour so that we can get set up for our last session, which is thinking about the future. So again, thank you so much to Suin and to Dale. This has just been such an amazing conversation, and a lot of thought goes into it, and it's so relevant to our island future. So thank you again. Okay, back in 8 minutes. He's worked with rural and island development in Norway and Denmark on the municipal level before embarking on his doctoral studies at Lund University in Sweden, where he's been since 2021. In this research, he explores what happened with the Danish small islands when the world got modern through a methodological framework of his own making called transhistorical ethnography. Oh, I so look forward to hearing more about this. Thank you, Jens.
Yeah. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you for the nice introduction. And you can see my screen now, right?
Yep, perfectly.
Yeah, very good. So my name is Jens, and in this last session, I would like to talk about I will start with the morphological aspects of island depopulation, because I think depopulation might be the biggest problem we face now when it comes to small islands, and especially when we discuss the future of these. I absolutely agree. Green energy transitioning and preservation of local heritage and so on, these are very important issues as well. But my main focus is depopulation. So that's what I'm talking about. And I will try to relate it to the politics of an island future. So I thought I would like to give you a quick run-through of some historical developments in my subject islands, which are the small islands in Denmark, to sort of arrive at a point where we can get down to business and discuss politics. And I also add something about the researcher's role in that department as well. So I have to, how do I, yeah, very good. So now it's working. Yeah. When we look at the Danish small islands, we have had a historical development where we have gone from 94 inhabited small islands in Denmark with around 18,000 inhabitants in total. And today we have reached a point where we have only got a little less than 40 small islands left, and the number of inhabitants there are 4,600. We hear this concept small islands quite often, and I think even Bali is mentioned to be a small island. Bali has 4.4 million inhabitants. So I think in order for us to have a meaningful conversation about Danish small islands, I have to say that technically a Danish small island is an island with no more than around 1,000 inhabitants, but quite often it's like 200 inhabitants. And it cannot be its own municipal unit, and it has to be ferry dependent. So just to make it easier to have a discussion on how different areas correspond with each other. So if we, I think when we talk about small islands, this must be the exact same case in similar islands in your countries as well. We can at least say that there are some three historical trends or problems that signifies what happened in these small islands in the past 100 years. First of all, we have had a significant population decline, or rather a decline in permanent residents. The reason why I think it's important to add this with permanent residents is that, as we saw with Pia's presentation on the Finnish islands in relation to the habitability concept, then we see that human activities as such has not diminished in these islands. It's just not any longer only permanent residents that are doing something in these islands. Here we think about second homeowners and tourists and so on. So one thing is that we have had a population decline. The next thing is that we have seen an increase in second home appropriation of island spaces, meaning permanent homes are increasingly being appropriated by second home users. That's another significant thing. And then in a Danish context, it took off around the 60s and 70s. And the latest trend or problem that we will have to face is the fact that we see a concentration and thus a segregational pattern in terms of newcoming in the Danish small islands, meaning that in 1/3 of the small islands, we see big influxes of newcomers on my age, coming from cities, moving to small islands, but only in 1 in 3 of the small islands. The rest have not this kind of attraction and so on. So when we talk about depopulation as a point of departure in terms of discussing the future, then I would like to think of it as something that happened in 2 phases. The first phase was historical, or as I would like to say, natural depopulation. It's natural to the extent that there was not much one could do about it. It belonged to history. It was it wasn't exactly anybody's fault, we can say. And it came about with a reduction of traditional livelihoods in the islands due to changes within agriculture and fishing and so on, that was partly caused by economic integration into the European market. Of course, they were also integrated to some extent before the 1940s, but it really took off there. And we also saw the introduction of new technologies and general structural changes within most of all agriculture, which simply reduced how many folks could live off the same amount of land that had always been there. Also, we saw a cultural shift in how we live in society and with whom and how many, meaning that we got more children 100 years ago, and the grandparents were living together with the mom and the dad in the farms and so on, and today they are shipped off to a nursing home and so on. So of course, all these things affected how many folks were living in an island community back then. And with a homage to Otis Duncan, the inventor of the Duncan Index of Dissimilarity, or the segregational index, I like to think of this as an ecological complex. He talked about ecological complexes, not in relation to the natural environment, but ecological in the Chicago School sociological sense, meaning how folks arrange and how folks integrate with each other when they're basically competing for the same resources and so on. But it's important for me to say, to some extent, depopulation was unavoidable. It has something to do with history. But then again, we have seen in the past maybe 30 or 40 years a different kind of depopulation that is political or man-made. And we can argue if the historical one also wasn't, to some extent man-made. Of course it was. But the last 30 or 40 years of depopulation, we see a trend that is very much tied to political practices and how the economic system has been arranged intentionally. First of all, when we think of ferries, in many of the small islands in Denmark, we see unchanged ferry crossing schedules since the 90s. So we haven't foreseen that maybe if integration into the job market changes over time, so should the ferries also. We might need to be able to sail earlier during the day and later for the ferry to come back. And another thing is that we have seen a period of maybe 15 years in Denmark where it was impossible to go to a bank or to a mortgage institution and get a loan for buying a house in small islands, but also in rural areas in general. And then we have seen something I would like to call poor municipal maintenance or zero-sum game, where the mainland municipal units that are supposed to take care of the islands, the small islands in Denmark, has tried to sort of not spend anything on it in terms of funding and so on. And then, of course, the laws on permanent residence has also been violated, meaning that houses that are actually protected in the sense that they have to be used permanently has been used otherwise, as second home owns, and the local municipality are not doing anything to really prevent that. So in terms of the future, here are the questions that we should be asking. Can we live with depopulation as an abandonment? Meaning, should we accept that there might be more islands that are almost on the brink or, not making it in the future? Can we identify any demographic tipping points where we say, okay, maybe we should focus our energy and resources on these islands and then we can give up on the others here? Or should we turn it around and say, how many folks do we actually want to live on the islands in the future? What is a realistic population growth aim? Mobility planning in general, can we as a society say, well, maybe 50% of the ferry lines should be have some sort of reinvestment, maybe they should sail more often and so on. The housing issue, can the number of people who would like to live on an island in the future, can they also do so in terms of the competition for permanent homes with the second home buyers and so on, but also is it possible to lend money to buy a house? And lastly, do we know how to control the municipal governments in terms of when they are not doing a great job and for different reasons and so on? I actually brought a case here from the municipality of Lolland, where we have 3 small islands that are now targeted for huge spending cuts and reform of ferry services and so on. But I think I'm running out of time, so I will jump to sort of the conclusion, because the case with Lolland municipality was that islanders are shouting about you know what, in the future we cannot make a living from here because of this ferry connection business, and it's tied to the municipal government and their actions and how they service us and so on. So what are the solutions to this? Should it be local activism as they do in these small islands, or municipal political work from the islands? As this far it has not changed anything. Or should we, as we talk about in Denmark quite often, should the state run the ferries rather than the municipal government? Can we develop sort of an ideology of rights, the right to have a habitable island community? Can I have a right as an islander in that sense, or national laws for how small island ferries, for instance, are managed and so on? Or should the government push the municipal governments to do a better job? There are some of the questions, and I think my experience from the Lolland municipal case was that islanders have got no friends in society. The majority of the Danes do not understand this problem. The national politicians are afraid to talk about it, and they're afraid of the economic implications of promising more funds to the municipal governments and so on. And quite often they're also more concerned with party political conflicts and alliances. I know this for a fact from this case, that for instance, the big Social Democratic Party in Denmark, you cannot approach them on this issue because it's a Social Democratic mayor they have in Lolland municipality, so they don't care about it basically. Sometimes the medias will get involved and so on and report on issues like this, but they are more or less buying the municipal government's propaganda that it's really not their fault and they're a poor municipality and they cannot just, fix everything. And I think maybe next to discussing the political future or the political work that lies ahead in order for us to have habitable small islands in the future and so on, maybe we should discuss our own role as researchers. And here I come to think maybe our Norwegian friend Thor, I think, maybe you remember Otto Brox, the grand old man in Norwegian rural research, but he really made a deal out of sort of fighting for the small folks on the coast in northern Norway and so on and so on. And I think this is quite inspiring because as researchers, we do have a voice. And I learned from my experience with the Lolland municipality and the islanders there that they are extremely grateful for this kind of aid because they feel left alone. They feel left out and so on. And in a sense, this analysis contradicts what we know by now in terms of in island studies, we want community-based, if not community-integrated research, and we want the community to speak. But really what I call for is top-down political reform that can aid, and as Nicholas suggested earlier, strategies like that can also become problematic and create distort sort of this strategy and so on. But I call for a shift toward politics in order to reverse at least the man-made version of depopulation, the most recent trend of depopulation. And in this, I think we as researchers really have a part to play if we do not shy away from this kind of work. And I mean, talking to a journalist once in a while is not enough. We need to throw ourselves into the battle. It's quite late here, so I think I should stop talking and yeah. I will stop here. It's difficult for me to really keep my head going, so I apologize in advance if some of it was a bit messy, but
Oh no, Jens, that was terrific, and you brought up some excellent points, and I know that we'll be returning to them as we come full circle after we've heard the other speakers and everybody gets a chance to ask questions. But it just reminds me of the work that in the 1950s and 60s of depopulating the islands around Newfoundland and Labrador, and what that has led to with loss of community and loss of attachment to place and home, and it was tragic in so many ways, and yet I won't speak for it, but it's been certainly written about a lot in the islands of Newfoundland, and it also made me think of island proofing. So hopefully we'll come back to that in our question and answer session. Thank you, Jens.
Thank you. Thank you.
So next we have Dr. Paula Gerstenblatt. Paula, if you are there, I see you there. Great. So introducing you, an artist and professor of social work at the University of Southern Maine. And I got to meet Paula for the first time at the North Atlantic Forum last year in Ireland. And it was such a pleasure meeting folks from the University of Southern Maine, including Paula. Her current research addresses the impacts of environmental, cultural, and social change in coastal communities in Maine, Greenland, and the North Atlantic through qualitative and arts-based methods. Dr. Gerstenblatt is a pioneer of art-based methods in research, teaching, and community practice. Her work on collage portraiture as a mode of inquiry, pedagogy, and community building represents complex narratives told from multiple perspectives and includes voices of those who are often overlooked. She's a National Endowment for the Arts grant recipient, and her recent work has been exhibited at the Parsonage Gallery, the Jewish Museum of Maine, and the Maine Center for Holocaust and Human Rights in projects supported in part by the Onion Foundation, the Maine North Atlantic Institute, and a USM Trustee Professorship Award. So looking forward to hearing what you have to tell us today, Paula. Thank you.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm sitting on the Maine-Canadian border in Lubec, Maine, with a bridge behind me to Campobello Island, and sort of a metaphorical bridge that looks at our linkages and our close relationship as neighbors in the North Atlantic. So Laurie, thanks for that introduction. I'm not going to talk too much about myself and just integrate it. I did not create a PowerPoint. I think my understanding was more to listen this morning and provide some reactions and responses based on what I heard here today, as well as my own experience. I don't live on an island, but I've spent a lot of time on islands and consider myself an island girl. I live by the sea, surrounded by water in Maine. I grew up in New England by the sea, then to the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area for 37 years, also surrounded by water. Spent a lot of time over the past 30-something years on a small Greek island called Folegandros. My son lived in Hawaii. I've spent time in the Caribbean and more recently in Maine, in Long Island, Maine, and Sears Island, Maine, and also in Greenland, which is the largest island in the world. Other than 4 years being landlocked in Austin, Texas, I really consider myself to be a water baby and island girl. I'm part of the Maine Greenland collaboration, which is a project that combines art and social and the natural sciences to explore cultural, environmental, social, economic changes facing coastal communities in Maine and Greenland. We launched our project on Long Island, Maine in 2020, and since then have expanded our work to include the Kyoto region of South Greenland,
partnership with the University of Greenland and Nuuk and the Sears Island area in Maine. Our research and creative activities include interviews with coastal residents, art-based community workshops, walks across diverse landscape, and educational and cultural exchanges. Most recently, Jan and I, as Laurie mentioned, have had a two-person exhibit, Intersecting Ecologies, mounted in Parsonage Gallery in Searsport, Maine, which brought us to Sears Island, an area that's grappling with some of the issues raised today of renewable energy, a wind turbine factory, which was proposed for Sears Island, which many locals did not want. They wanted it across the bay on Mac Point, which is a whole other conversation, but very much aligned to what I've heard here today in terms of local autonomy and voice. And the paradox, in a way, of wanting to reduce dependency on fossil fuels, but also address many complex and nuanced issues when bringing clean energy to a local community. I'm pleased to say Nick joined us because we were funded by the Onion Foundation to have a day-and-a-half retreat to discuss these issues with 20 residents and 20 people from away. Through our activities, we have a repository of transcripts through qualitative research and articles we've written, photographs, videos, and sound recordings, which serve as the basis for creating intersecting narratives and about changing ecologies and lived experiences in Maine, Greenland, and the North Atlantic. Our work is shared through art exhibits, scholarly papers, public programs to build beneficial reciprocal relationships between Maine and Greenland communities and now throughout the North Atlantic. Really grounding our work, and I don't know if anybody knows of Zaid Hassan's social lab model, his book, Social Lab's Revolution. The social lab is a social, iterative, and experimental. As we've heard today, the theme of rapid change is something we share. We deal with wicked problems, which are complex problems that often when we solve one, we create 5 more problems. And really the concept is that we don't fix things, we respond. Things are moving too quickly, in many ways always have been. There's no fixed response, so we're responding as opposed to fixing. Deep ecology is the other theoretical grounding for us, which is an environmental philosophy founded on the principle of biocentrism, positing that all life possesses intrinsic value and that interdependent of human usefulness. It advocates for a fundamental shift in human consciousness and a reduction in human interference with the non-human world, believing that human well-being is inextricably linked to the flourishing of all lives, and that humans are part of and not separate from their ecologies. Both social labs and deep ecology shift a paradigm of how we plan and approach complex issues of concern to local communities and residents, not just the researcher. So I'll just briefly touch on an example in our work. In Greenland, we did video interviews asking folks what did it feel like to be researched, to take things to a meta level, to hear how people felt about being researched, and Greenland has an inundation of researchers. And we heard what one might expect, but in this case, it was translation. They want to help. They want findings brought back to them. They want more part in this. And so I think that's probably not something that's unusual for most of us. This approach, the approach of being relational, reciprocal, and frequent contact over time is something that applies to any place. My work in Greenland, my work in Texas and Maine, et cetera, internationally with an adaptation in consideration of local characteristics and culture. So here's some of my takeaways from listening to everybody and based on my own experience. We really have to contextualize the region with considerations, as mentioned today, geopolitically, and the complexity. I think there's a strong need to educate ourselves and our students, no matter the discipline, to understanding history, economics, political issues, and cultural. Without that, we're really flying blind and short-changing ourselves and others. We have to go beyond the surface and the obvious. And I think as academics, we have spent a lot of time and we're very steeped in our areas of study and our discipline. And we sometimes miss out on the larger context of things that we're less comfortable with or maybe less versed in, like history, economics, et cetera. Even those things intersect, as clearly stated today, with all the areas that we work in. The other thing is recognizing our interconnectedness and common concerns. So an example in Maine, we're in the US, however, we're neighbors with Canada, Greenland, Iceland, and share many similar issues with the North Atlantic region, economically, politically, socially. In many ways, we're dealing with similar issues and collaborating. So what happens in Greenland impacts the world, but interconnectedness does not mean that we can dictate, rather understands the needs, assets, and challenges from a local perspective, and merge that with a more global context. So many things mentioned today are shared across nations and regions, and I find myself nodding as I listened. From the Window Project, we have a window project in indigenous territory here. The revival of the wool industry, preservation of culture, renewable energy and autonomy, fishing, overreach without consideration of local wishes, the assets, arts-based work, and cultural preservation, which is we are seeing thriving in communities, and really too many to mention. The third thing is research collaboration and institutional collaboration, using relational engaged approaches, arts-based methods, interdisciplinary teams, co-construction of design with locals, practice and application with our local partners, which includes grassroots organizations, individuals, institutions with a value on local knowledge and aims. To avoid research fatigue and duplication, we need to work together. In Greenland, in very small areas, there'll be a huge convergence of researchers. And one of the things that the interviews revealed was, why can't you people coordinate better? You're all coming here, and maybe if you would coordinate better, then it would lessen the burden on our time, because they're taking away time from their work and are not compensated for it and get multiple requests, often in the same areas. To take the silos down, I strongly encourage our institutions to invest in inter-university collaboration and international collaboration as well. This way, we and our students see and understand the world better, and communities with relational non-drive-by models understand us in elevating their voice and knowledge and concerns. And I'm going to bring up something that I think is not often mentioned at the many conferences I go to, and that is that while we have such a strong and deserved focus on attending to the community needs and being deeply engaged, there's also a fatigue, besides research fatigue, on the part of communities that is the consequence to researchers, teachers, and community practitioners doing this work. It's complex, it's exhausting, and it's messy. We focus on community as we should, and our students as we should. However, being in multiple roles and prioritizing the needs of the project, the class, the community, without attending to ourselves and our positionality, not just in a critical way, leads to burnout and fatigue for us. And I think that's an area that we just don't talk about enough, because this is really complex work. And I guess I'll just conclude with an appreciation for all the good work being done on all levels, the possibilities for collaboration and to share what's working as well as what's not working. And I certainly will be reaching out to hear more from everyone, because there are so many things that are really exciting. And as difficult as these times are, and being the only researcher, the only participant from the US, I can say these are not easy times to be living in the United States. And so connecting with folks and continuing to further those relationships has really been a source of joy and a source of possibility. And in these difficult times, it's even more important for us to strengthen these relationships and work together. So I'm really grateful for being part of this group and many others internationally that are furthering this work. So I think I'll just leave it at that.
Oh, thanks, Paula. That was really beautiful, and I think it takes courage. I know it takes courage for you to speak like this with us, and really appreciate your involvement and enthusiasm and the care that you're bringing to this organization. Thank you. I will just pick up on a couple of things that you said about being proactive. This was one of the, as I mentioned before, one of the reasons for doing this symposium was that we are trying to be proactive. I like what you said about the circularity of things, that we have to, that's part of our ethos as islands and these systems thinking that comes with living on an island, and sharing what's working. Sometimes more importantly, what's not working, right? We don't need to keep making the same mistakes because we can learn not just from ourselves, but from one another. But I'm sure we'll come back more to that. Our next and final speaker is Andrew Jennings, and I am really happy to be working all the time with Andrew. We do a lot of things together, including co-editing books. And again, I hope we get to do it again because he's a wonderful partner to work with. So Andrew, coming to us from Shetland, is an historian and an academic. He's the Associate Professor in Island Studies at the University of Highlands and Islands, commonly known as UHI. His career is built on the principle of embedded scholarship, which involves conducting world-class research from within the community of Shetland. He leads the UArctic Thematic Network, the Northern and Arctic Island Studies Research, and has established the Institute for Northern Studies Islands Hub. He co-edited the volume, The Bridge Effect, with me, The Critical Reflections in the Age of Technological Solutionism, which came out in 2024, and is on the editorial board for the North Atlantic World, Land and Sea as Cultural Space, AD 400 to 900 series. He is recognized internationally as a leading authority in island studies and Viking studies. So thank you, Andrew, for leading us and being part of this today.
Blimey, Laurie, thank you very much. That's what happens when you get AI to write a bio for you.
At least you're fessing up.
Anyway, thank you very much for that. This has been great. It's been really interesting to hear what everyone has got to say, and I think we're going to take a lot of inspiration from this and hopefully some lessons about the future as well. So hopefully what I'm going to say will help just to keep the conversation going for the last part of this session. So that's me peering into a geo, looking for a successful future for the Scottish Islands. So can't say I found it, but I will keep looking. So my short presentation, I'll just move on, is based on a series of workshops that I ran in the Scottish Islands in 2023, including Shetland, Orkney, and the Isle of Lewis. And researchers and community members came together to imagine sustainable and successful futures for the islands. Because the Scottish Islands at the moment, just like other regions in the North and the Arctic, stand at a critical crossroads. They currently face a range of interconnected challenges, from remoteness and climate change to economic pressures and the erosion of cultural heritage, and as Jens was saying, demographic challenges as well. So their future depends on how they navigate these challenges. Is the future going to be a vibrant and successful one, or is it going to be managed, or more likely mismanaged, decline? So I'd like to just run through the main points of the debate that we had in the workshops and the recommendations that came from them. And I think you'll hear that many of the ideas chime rather well with what you've heard today. So let's start by plunging into the first major challenge that was highlighted throughout the workshops, and that was the disconnect between islands and centralised government. The problem was seen that policies are often designed by or for urban centres, so in this case Edinburgh, and fail to account for unique island needs, such as island transport, specialised industries, and social capital. And as you can imagine, a mainland-centric policy may not understand the critical importance of things in islands, such as the ferry service, which is not just a commuting option, but a lifeline for many islands. And this lack of control that islands have, and the lack of metropole understanding, can lead to, well, all sorts of problems, including out-migration, especially among young people seeking agency and opportunity elsewhere. That's the Scottish Parliament, by the way, in case anyone's wondering what that building is. So what was suggested as a solution to this disconnect in the workshop? Well, it was felt that we need to require a fundamental shift in mindset. It was felt that we need to advocate for meaningful devolution, or any other such words, or autonomy, control, but devolution was the word that came out, which isn't necessarily about separation, but about mature, equitable partnership. And this would mean granting islands greater control over their marine resources and local economic strategies, for example. And we also need to implement meaningful island proofing. That came up again and again. Now that's a legislative mechanism where every national policy is vetted for its impact on islands before it's implemented. So we're supposed to have that in Scotland, but it was felt by many in the workshops that this was more of a ticky box thing rather than an effective policy. Also, we need to move from simple consultation to true co-design, actively collaborating with island communities and making them partners in the policies and in the solutions, and not just be seen as a problem to be solved. So that was one big issue, came up again and again. The next one was something that's felt deeply personally for many island communities, and we've already seen a lot of discussion today, and that's about culture and language. Indigenous languages, because that's what Scottish Gaelic, Orcadian and Shetland are. I don't think we need to debate that. These languages are both precarious and vital. So they're a core part of island identity and ICH and history, and they provide unique worldviews for the islands as well. However, all of them face threats like declining numbers of native speakers and the dominance of English in everyday life. And this doesn't just lead to cultural loss. If you're so inclined, it also leads to economic loss as well. Think of the unique storytelling, music and traditions which can be lost. These are assets that can attract visitors and underpin the creative industries. And when they're lost, so too is a unique selling proposition. I don't like these economic terms, but there are some people out there do. And if you're talking to policymakers, these are the sort of buzzwords that you have to use. This, by the way, is a map of Gaelic on the west, and Orcadian and Shetland in the north. It's under the Scots banner, but that's where the densest numbers of speakers still are. So there was a positive vibe in the workshops around cultural heritage and language, despite the challenges. And in the Scottish context, it was felt that there could be even effective revitalization of cultural heritage and language if the process was community-owned and community-directed. And it was felt that it's about empowering local leaders and providing the resources for things like immersion schools, mentorship programs, evening classes, digital archives. And it was argued that there also had to be a sort of holistic cultural policy that was integrated into education and into economic planning and into crafts and into governance, rather than just existing in a silo, in the language department or whatever it might be. So by highlighting this heritage and recognizing its economic value, it was felt that we could create a virtuous cycle where cultural preservation becomes a driver for economic vitality. Now, of course, economic vitality, or economic viability, if you like, is at the heart of any island's survival. If you're not economically viable, nobody's going to live there. But the way that we pursue it matters, and we've discussed that today. There's dangers of dependency on a single sector, such as tourism or fishing, and that makes communities vulnerable to external shocks, and often conventional economic models just focus on large-scale projects that can lead to jobs, but often come at the expense of social cohesion and the health of the environment. And the profits may not even stay within the community, as we've found in a whole range of island situations. So it was felt that the answer is to rethink what a successful economy looks like, and that we need to prioritize community well-being. So our metrics of success should go beyond GDP, which everybody knows is, I don't know, garbage. I'm sure we could work out, it doesn't really tell you anything useful, especially not for smaller rural or island communities. Instead of just going for that, we should include social capital, the health of the environment, and also local happiness. And I've got a PhD student, and so is Laurie. We're co-supervising a PhD student who's looking at island happiness and how that can be measured. So it was also suggested by people in the workshop that we should promote alternative models like circular economies that minimize waste and maximize local resources, or particularly in those islands that are devoted to fishing and the marine environment, we should be doing more with the blue economy and working out more sustainable uses for our marine resources. But that should be done by the island communities themselves. And because most importantly, the thing that came out time and time again was that we need to foster community ownership of businesses. And this was the key to ensuring that the benefits and the wealth generated stay right where they're needed and where they should be in the islands themselves. Unsurprisingly, ICT, the internet and mobile phone coverage, featured in the discussion because we're not all like the Faroe Islands. There are certain parts of the Scottish Islands where phone coverage is rubbish and where the internet speed is not very good. And in our modern world, and increasingly as we move into the future, digital connectivity is not a luxury, it's a lifeline, and particularly in island communities. But it is a double-edged sword. There's some of the discussion that came out. On the one hand, it holds immense potential for remote work and education, but on the other, it can create a new digital divide. So people said we have to consider risks also like cybersecurity threats and the potential of large online retailers siphoning money away from local businesses. Everybody in Shetland uses Amazon, so there's a lot of stuff coming, the postal services and various things might do well, but the local community shops maybe are threatened by that. So there are positive and negative things. So it was argued in the workshops that the solution for the ICT challenges is not just to build infrastructure, although that's vital, but we also have to build a thoughtful, co-created digital strategy, which includes equitable access, where we invest to eliminate black spots and make connectivity affordable for everyone. And we also need skills training to ensure people have the knowledge to use this technology effectively. Now, I'm not saying this doesn't go on, it does, but remember these workshops were across 3 archipelagos and the situation varies in each. And this is looking at more like a general thing that we need to do. And it was also suggested that we need to ensure purposeful integration. So using technology to serve our values, such as enabling remote work to retain our youth and creating online platforms to preserve the culture for future generations. So let's not be afraid of technological developments. Let's embrace it, but on our own terms. So in conclusion, what did people think? Well, to bring it all together, it was noted that all these issues are actually deeply interconnected. And that's what we've been finding in this discussion today. An intervention in one area without considering its impact on the others is likely to fail. So a sort of holistic systemic approach is essential, if difficult. So if one thing really stuck out from the workshops, which underpins everything, it was self-determination, empowering islanders to define their own priorities and build a future that aligns with their own values and aspirations. And to quote Abraham Lincoln, the best way to predict your future is to create it. However, to create it, you need the tools. And in this context, you need to be able to exercise relevant power to make the decisions for yourselves. So I suppose that would be my main recommendation from these workshops for the Scottish Islands. There needs to be more self-determination in the islands and by islanders. And I know some of our northern and Arctic islands already have that. But even so, even the Faroe Islands, there are challenges to the decisions that the Faroese can make, especially in this new geopolitical era. But it comes down to that, having the tools to make decisions that are relevant for the island communities and the decisions being made by the island communities themselves, not by outside agencies. And yeah, there's a picture of my dog Sky looking hopefully into the future there. So that's really all I want to say, that we had these series of workshops where similar things were addressed, but just in a Scottish context. And I think they have absolute relevance for what we've been discussing today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew. And what a fantastic way of presenting and us being able to see those conclusions that came out of that important exercise that you did in Scotland. And thus, I think, as you said before, was the inspiration for doing this across a larger region, across our whole northern and Arctic region. So I'm curious then, yeah, I haven't seen any questions yet in the chat, but would love to see some questions or comments. But thinking about what our three panelists have said, and how you summed up what happened in Scotland, Andrew, are there some similarities then that we can draw upon all of our northern and Arctic islands? That are there synergies with what you discovered in Scotland, with what others are saying from our, you know, what Paula had to say and what Jens, and then some of the other speakers, thinking about our future and what are a couple of the most important things that we need to be doing to make sure that we are on the right track for a good future. So I open that up, and maybe Andrew, you can start, and then we'll go back through Paula and Jens.
Well, I just return to my last comment there. It's about being able to make the relevant decisions at the right level.
But how do you get that, right? How and you know, you guys have gone, Scotland has gone through this amazing island proofing thing, and it's not working apparently.
Yeah, but it's not being cancelled. It's being worked on. And I'm not sure if Adele is still with us at the moment in the participants. Where is she? Is Adele? No, Adele seems to have left us. But Adele she's just submitted her PhD, by the way, but she's been looking at the impact of the Scottish Island Plan, which was part of this, well, it came out of the Scottish Island Act of 2023 or 2022. And the Scottish Island Plan was devised by the Scottish Government as in response to a campaign within the Scottish Islands. And as part of that, there was the island proofing was decided that this was going to be part of the process. But the plan itself, there was a problem in that many people didn't realize it was, well, this, I don't want to second guess what Adele said, but shall we say it wasn't as obvious to people living in the islands as might have been anticipated. And many people didn't feel that it had the impact that was anticipated. So the plan is going back, there's a new plan coming out, and island proofing will still be part of it. But again, it's like everything; these things take a while to become part of common knowledge, you know. So let's hope that in due course, island proofing will become second nature, both to Scottish government and also to people living in the islands and those who have plans for businesses, etc. That they know the first thing they need to do is check that it's been island proofed. Because often they have to then do it after the act, the act, and it holds everything up. But yeah, I think, as you say, how do we do it? It's just about you have to engage with the power that's above to try and ensure that some of the power, the decision making gets, in this case, devolved, brought down to a lower level. And I put a link in the chat earlier on. That Hannah Mary, who's standing for the Scottish National Party in Shetland, is very much at the forefront of the debate at the moment about autonomy in Shetland. That would be devolving power from the Scottish government to Shetland, where relevant powers should be exercised. But there's no easy answer. It takes time, it takes pressure, it takes discussions for people. But I think we have examples in our group of where autonomous Northern Islands do rather well. And there's Firouz sitting there basking in the glory. That is the Faroe Islands. The Faroe Islands are used as an example by Shetland all the time of what could be done. And maybe eventually it will get through. And if we hold this in 25 years, maybe Shetland will be autonomous and exercising the same powers as the Faroe Islands. Who can say? We have to imagine these things, and that would be my hope for a successful future.
Beautiful. One of the questions in the chat is from Stephen Malcolm. What would be the role of a national politician in the proposed devolved future for islands? And perhaps, Jens, maybe you can speak to this, because you were saying that Denmark, you don't pay any attention to islands. Do you have any champions in the Danish parliament?
Yeah, I think so. But in the past 10 or 15 years, it has always been one parliament member that really embraced the island cause, or the small island cause. And with such an affiliation, other things come along. So for some reason, it has been far-right politicians in Denmark that took extra care of small islands in political discussions and so on. So all of a sudden, you would have to align with other political ideas and so on, which is really not beneficial for the process of creating a national island development plan or anything like that.
It makes me wonder, how people around here, if you come to know a place and love a place, that you will care for it and think about Danish nationals. Will they vacation on small islands, and will they learn to care about them and then think about them when it comes to the larger picture? Yeah, it's just throwing that out.
Yeah. No, but I think most Danes, when you explain to them this situation, they understand, okay, we need to dedicate some resources, and then they will automatically assume that it's extremely expensive. But when they learn how little this is in the Danish national budget, then they'll say, why are we discussing this? Why don't we just fix this situation and make sure that we have habitable islands for the next 50 years or something like that?
Yeah, good. Paula, just thinking to this larger question as well, is there anything here that's resonant for the Maine Islands in thinking about putting Maine Islanders first and policies? And do you have a champion in the Maine legislature? And you're on mute.
What drew us to Long Island, Maine? Actually, we were supposed to go to Greenland first, and then the pandemic hit, so that put an end to that. So we decided to focus locally first, and we chose Long Island because it seceded from the city of Portland in 1993. There had been rumblings, but when the city of Portland wanted, the mainland wanted to close their local school, that's when it really gained momentum. And they went through the process of seceding from Portland, and Chebeague Island did after. It's a bit harder to do it now. We do have champions. In fact, Shelley Pengri, who is one of our congressional representatives, lives on an island on North Haven. And there are people who champion it. Sometimes politics makes strange bedfellows, where a Republican, fairly neocon Republican who represents Sears Island, was championing for complete conservation of the island, kick the DOT out, the Department of Transportation, and preserve the island. So here you find people aligning on an issue that don't align on any such issue anywhere. My thought, and I agree with Andrew about tapping into the top, is, and I guess it's my Howard Zinn indoctrination of civil disobedience, is that really the grassroots movements, the local movements, are the ones that will really move, the boulder up the mountain in the long run. And without that kind of groundswell, I don't really see anything working, because otherwise your fate is in the hands of maybe a few vocal people in a local community that are advocating for one interest or the other, who are either well connected, or what do they say, the squeaky wheel, greases the machine, whatever the machine. And I find that the only way to really impact is to have a groundswell of grassroots movements and starting local. And then it goes out. And I think any movement we've looked at would teach us that that's really the way real change is made. It's never made from top down, because, they have other interests in mind.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's so cool. And it really, thinking about Nick's question in the chat, we're talking about not meeting our 2030 emissions reductions target. And so he's wondering, instead of future goals, which we seldom hit, what is one thing we can do today in pursuit of transformative island sustainability? So grassroots, get behind this and really try and affect change in that way. So yeah, beautiful. Thank you. We have about, no minutes left, but I'm gonna just turn it back over to Andrew to say a few words about what happens next. This has been an amazing day, a half day of chatting and sharing, and all this collective wisdom, I'm sure, is going to be put to good use. Turning it back to you, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Well, I'd just like to thank you and thank everyone for wonderful contributions, and thank the audience as well who've been here and asked questions, and hopefully, we'll take away some of the thoughts, and maybe hopefully have learned things from different countries that they were unaware of. So I think it's been a very rich and informative afternoon. As to what happens next, well, this is recorded, so it will be available on the Institute for Northern Studies Island Hub webpage. It will also be on the Institute for Northern Studies YouTube channel. It will form part of a resource for people in future to look at. And it's also, as part of the University of the Arctic Thematic Network, it's something that shows that the thematic network is vibrant and is doing things and linking communities across the north. And I think the network that we've built up will be strengthened, and we'll look for new things to do in future. I think we could have regular, and that doesn't mean every week or every month, but we could have regular such symposia in future. We can look for other island themes and gather our forces for that. But in the meantime, everyone should keep in contact, and those who are still there and watching, get in contact with us so that we can build up a list of interested people and take this discussion forward and ensure that we have successful, vibrant islands in 2050. I think we will, but we have to. We don't just leave it to those out there. We have to build it ourselves, and I'm sure we'll be successful. So thank you very much indeed, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. And I just popped my email address in there. Maybe, Andrew, you can do the same. Just make sure that you get on our NAISR mailing list. And really fantastic to expand our network in this way. Wonderful work.
There we go.
Thank you, everyone.
And there it comes.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All the best, everyone.